a billionaire on her knees, a mechanic with nothing left to lose, and a car that hadn't made a sound in 40 years until the night it blew everything wide open. She hired him because no one else could fix it. He took the job because he had a daughter to feed. Neither of them knew the rusted old Mustang sitting in that dark garage held a secret that would destroy a powerful man, clear an innocent one, and tear apart everything Victoria Ashford thought she knew about her father. This is where it starts. Don't you dare look away. Hey, if this story pulls you in, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this thing travels. Now let's get into it. The garage smelled like rust and old regret. Victoria Ashford stood at the entrance for a long moment, her hand resting on the door frame, not quite ready to step inside. Behind her, the Virginia afternoon was warm and golden, the kind of day that made everything look gentler than it actually was. In front of her, it was different. In front of her, it was dark and cool, and it smelled like something that had been left alone too long. She stepped in anyway. Her heels clicked against the concrete, each sound swallowed quickly by the heavy silence. A single bare bulb hung from a wire near the ceiling, and when she found the pull chain and yanked it, the light that came on was yellowed and weak, like it was tired of trying. The Mustang sat in the center of the garage like a sleeping animal. A 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, Brittany blue, or at least it had been blue once. Now the paint had faded to something closer to gray, a pale ghost of a color, streaked with rust at the wheel wells and along the lower doors. One side mirror was gone. The hood had a long crack running along the left side, probably from when something heavy had fallen on it, and nobody had cared enough to fix it. The windshield was intact but filmed over with 40 years of accumulated grime. The interior, what she could see through the driver's side glass, was a wreck of cracked leather and deteriorated foam and a steering wheel that had warped slightly out of round. Victoria looked at it for a long time without speaking. Her assistant, a sharp, perpetually efficient young woman named Dana, stood a few feet back, tablet in hand, waiting. Dana was good at waiting. It was part of why Victoria had kept her on when she took over the company. Your father had it shipped here from the Arizona property in 2019, Dana said quietly. Before he got sick. We think he intended to restore it himself, but he didn't, Victoria said. No. Victoria moved closer. She reached out and touched the hood with the tips of her fingers, then pulled her hand back when she realized the metal was cold, colder than it should have been, somehow, considering the warmth outside. Maybe that was just her imagination. She wasn't sure. He told me about this car when I was 9, she said. He said he was going to fix it up, and we were going to drive it to the beach together, just the two of us. She paused. He never did. Dana didn't say anything. She was smart enough to know when silence was the right move. The gala is in 43 days, Victoria said, straightening up, pulling her voice back to its usual register. Controlled, forward-moving, no room for sentiment. I want the car there, restored, running, presentable. Dana looked at her. Victoria, I know what you're going to say. 5 restoration specialists have already declined or failed. The last one, Marcus Webb from the Chicago firm. He spent 11 days on it and told us the engine block was, quote, a lost cause. The vintage parts are nearly impossible to source for this specific production series, and the timeline is 43 days, Victoria repeated. Dana exhaled quietly through her nose. Yes, 43 days. Victoria turned and walked back toward the door. Find me someone else. Finding someone else turned out to be harder than it sounded. Dana spent 6 days making calls. She contacted restoration shops in 12 states, reached out to vintage automobile specialists, posted discreetly in collector communities. Most of them took one look at the specs: 1967 Mustang, rare K-code engine series, non-original component modifications, decades of total neglect, and passed without hesitation. 2 agreed to look at it. One showed up, walked around the car twice, and left without explaining why. The other sent a written estimate so far above budget that Dana had initially thought it was a joke. It was not a joke. She was on the phone with Victoria, trying to figure out next steps, when the name came up. It didn't come from any official directory. It came from a mechanic at a shop in Richmond, someone Dana had spoken to early in her search, who had called back 3 days later to say he'd thought of someone. "There's a guy," the mechanic said, "down in Caldwell. Little town, doesn't even show up right on maps. He runs a place called Cross and Sons, though it's just him and his kid. No sons involved, far as I know. He fixes machines other people write off. I've seen his work. It's the best I've ever seen." "Has he worked on this era of Mustang before?" Dana asked. A pause. "I don't know exactly what he's worked on, but I know he used to be some kind of automotive engineer before. Not a mechanic, an engineer. Something happened, and he ended up in Caldwell. That's all I got." Dana wrote down the name, Ethan Cross. She told Victoria. Victoria said fine, set up a meeting. Caldwell, Virginia looked exactly like a town that had been forgotten at some point and never managed to remind anyone it existed. The main road had 2 stoplights. One of them blinked yellow on a permanent basis. Whether by design or malfunction, nobody seemed to know or care. There was a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a small grocery that closed early on Sundays. Houses spread out behind these things in quiet rows, modest and tidy. The kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors' names and left each other mostly alone. Cross and Sons. Automotive repair sat at the end of Maple Street in a converted 2-bay garage with hand-painted lettering on a wooden sign. The parking lot had 3 cars in it when Victoria's black SUV pulled up. A rusted pickup truck, an early 2000 sedan with the rear bumper held on by wire, and a small bicycle with training wheels that had been leaned against the wall near the side door. Victoria looked at the bicycle for a moment. Her driver, Marcus, an ex-Marine named Marcus, opened her door without being asked. She stepped out and straightened her jacket. Dana walked ahead to the door and knocked on the frame, since the main bay doors were both open and there didn't seem to be a formal entrance. From inside came the sound of something mechanical, a steady rhythmic clicking, and country music playing low from a small speaker somewhere. Then a voice, slightly muffled. "Be right out." A minute passed. Then Ethan Cross appeared from around the side of a lifted truck, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had given up on absorbing anything about 4 years ago. He was 32, though he looked like someone who'd had a few extra years' worth of life compressed into that time. Medium height, lean, with the kind of physical presence that comes from actual work rather than a gym membership. He had dark hair that needed cutting and a jawline that carried 3 days of stubble without it looking particularly intentional. His hands were stained with grease along the knuckles, and the navy coveralls he wore had a name patch on the chest that had partially peeled away. He looked at the SUV first, then at Dana, then at Victoria. He didn't look surprised exactly, but something moved through his expression, a kind of fast recalibration. "Ethan Cross?" Victoria said. "Yeah. I'm Victoria Ashford. I know who you are." He tucked the rag into his back pocket. "Ashford Industries. Saw you in some trade publications a few years ago." She hadn't expected that. Most people who lived in towns like Caldwell didn't read trade publications. She let it pass without comment. "I have a restoration job," she said. "A 1967 Mustang Fastback, K-code engine, been sitting untouched for 40 years. I need it running and presentable in 43 days. I've spoken to every specialist on the East Coast and several beyond it. Your name was the last lead I had, so here I am." He studied her for a moment, not in a rude way. More like he was trying to figure out whether what she'd said was straightforward or whether there were pieces underneath it. "Who told you about me?" he asked. "A mechanic in Richmond? He didn't give me much. Said you fix things other people give up on." Ethan glanced over at the old sedan in the lot, then back at her. "I mainly do repair work, insurance claims, old vehicles, that kind of thing. I'm not really a restoration shop." "I know that. I don't have a big team. It's just me, and I have a part-time kid who helps on weekends and sometimes afternoons." "I understand." "And 43 days is not a lot of time for a machine that's been sitting for 4 decades. "No," Victoria agreed. "It isn't." He was quiet for a moment. A sound drifted from the back of the shop. Something like a small crash, followed immediately by the kind of silence that follows a small crash when someone is hoping nobody heard it. Ethan turned his head toward the back. "Lily." A pause. "Lily, I heard it." A small voice came back. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine. I asked what happened." Nothing happened. Something fell. Another pause. A wrench fell. Were you climbing again? Silence, which was apparently the answer. Ethan turned back to Victoria, and for a half second the controlled professional version of him slipped, and she caught a glimpse of something much more real, tired, stretched, doing his best. Then it was gone. My daughter, he said. She's 8. She climbs things she's not supposed to. I see. He looked at Victoria steadily. Why do you want this car restored, specifically? She blinked. Nobody had asked her that before. The other 5 specialists had taken the job, or declined it, based on specs and money. None of them had asked why. It was my father's, she said. He passed away 14 months ago. There's a memorial gala being held in his honor at the end of next month. I want the car there. As a centerpiece. Yes, as something that represents him. And something he never got the chance to finish. Ethan nodded slowly. He looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. I'd need to see the car before I commit to anything. Of course. And I'd need the job to work around my schedule here. I can't abandon my other clients. Understood. We can discuss compensation and logistics. One more thing, he said. She waited. I'll need to bring Lily sometimes. When I'm working late or on weekends and school isn't in session, she won't touch anything she's not supposed to, but she comes with me. Victoria looked at him, looked at the bicycle leaning against the wall, looked back at him. That's fine, she said. He nodded. Okay, let me see the car. They brought the Mustang to the garage the following morning. Ethan watched the flatbed back in with his arms crossed and his coffee going cold in his hand. He waited until the car was down, then he walked around it slowly, the way surgeons are said to approach a patient before they begin. Quiet, methodical, looking for things other people miss. He crouched near the front left wheel well and examined the rust, stood back up, opened the driver's door. It groaned in protest, and looked at the interior without getting in. Moved to the hood, felt around the edges, found the release, and lifted it. He stood over the engine bay for a long time. Dana was standing nearby, monitoring, ready to communicate whatever he found back to Victoria, who had returned to the city for meetings and would take calls in the afternoon. Well, Dana asked after the silence had stretched past comfortable. Give me a minute. She gave him 3. He was still looking at the engine. This is a K code, he said finally. Yes, the documentation confirms. I'm not asking you, I'm saying it to myself. He reached in and touched something near the block gently, the way you'd touch something fragile. Hypo 289. Original. Someone modified the carburetor at some point, probably in the 80s, and then it just sat. He straightened up. Do you know what happened to the original air cleaner? I don't have that information. It's gone. So's the passenger side valve cover. Missing parts are going to be the hard part. These engine series were produced in low numbers. Parts don't just show up in catalogs. He let the hood down carefully and stood for a moment with his hands on it, looking at the car the way people sometimes look at things that make them feel something they aren't sure how to name. I know this engine, he said quietly. You've worked on this series before? He didn't answer right away. A long time ago, he said. Yeah. That first week, Ethan arrived at 6 in the morning and rarely left before 10 at night. He brought Lily the first Saturday, a small, serious-faced girl with dark hair worn in a braid and a tendency to carry a battered paperback book wherever she went. She settled herself into a folding chair in the corner of the garage with her book and a juice box, and she stayed there mostly, except for when she got bored and started asking questions. Why is it that color? She asked, somewhere around mid-morning. Ethan was underneath the car, doing something that involved a lot of careful prying sounds. What color? That gray color. Was it always gray? No, it was blue originally, called Brittany blue. The gray is just what happens when paint gets old and the sun hits it wrong for long enough. Can you put the blue back? That's the plan. Lily considered this. What's the plan exactly? The plan is I fix everything that's broken, replace everything that's missing, clean everything that's dirty, and then we repaint it. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot. How long? 42 days. Lily was quiet for a moment, then, Dad, that still sounds like a lot. Thank you for that assessment. You're welcome. He came out from under the car long enough to look at her, grease on his forehead, and she looked back at him with complete seriousness. And despite everything he had to deal with, the missing parts, the corroded components, the impossible timeline, he felt something loosen slightly in his chest. Go back to your book, he said. I already finished it. Then start it again. She made a face, but she opened it again. Maser. By the 5th day, Ethan had a full assessment written out by hand in a yellow legal pad. 3 pages of notes in tight, precise handwriting that shifted between technical shorthand and ordinary language, the way someone writes when they're thinking faster than they're writing. He photographed every page and sent them to Donna, who forwarded them to Victoria. Victoria called him that evening. This is very thorough, she said. I need to order parts before they become unavailable. Some of these are being held by private collectors. I've already reached out to 3 of them. The brake lines. All need replacement. Rubber deteriorates over time even when a car isn't being driven. The brake fluid will have absorbed moisture over 40 years and is probably corrosive at this point. I won't touch those brakes until the lines are entirely new. And the engine itself? A pause. The engine is going to be the hardest part, and the most important part. Some of the components I can clean and rebuild. The carburetor is going to need complete rebuilding. The valve covers. I found one a collector in Tennessee is willing to sell. The other one I'm still tracking down. He paused again. What I'm telling you is that it's doable, but it won't be easy, and it won't be neat, and there are going to be days where it looks worse than when we started. I know, Victoria said. Most people don't actually know when they say that. Mr. Cross, Ethan. Ethan, she said, adjusting without hesitation. I've been told by 5 other specialists that this car was impossible. I've been told the engine is a lost cause, that the timeline is unrealistic, and that I should consider a cosmetic restoration rather than a mechanical one. I'm telling you right now that I don't want cosmetic. I want that engine running. I want to hear it. There was a brief silence. Why? He asked. She hadn't expected him to ask again. He'd already asked once at the garage in Caldwell, and she'd given him the answer about the gala, about her father. This felt like a different question, or the same question asked deeper. He promised me, she said. When I was 9 years old, he promised me he was going to fix that car, and we'd go for a drive. Just us. And he never did it. He got busy, and then life got complicated, and then he got sick, and then he was gone. She stopped. I want to hear the engine because he never let me. I want it to run because he said it would. That's all. A long quiet on the line. Okay, Ethan said, I'll get it running. Day 9 started badly. Ethan arrived to find that the valve cover he'd ordered from Tennessee had been shipped to the wrong address. A logistics error that would take 3 days to resolve. The replacement carburetor kit he'd sourced had 2 missing gaskets, a quality control failure that sent him back to his parts suppliers, and cost him most of the morning. By noon, he'd lost half a day and gained a headache that sat behind his left eye and refused to move. He sat on a rolling stool outside the garage, eating half a sandwich he'd packed that morning and staring at his phone, working through supplier contacts. A black SUV pulled into the lot. Victoria stepped out, which surprised him. He'd expected Dana, who handled most of the on-site visits, but it was Victoria, in a dark blazer and slacks, looking like she'd come straight from a boardroom meeting, which she probably had. She looked at his face and the half-eaten sandwich, and the phone, and the general expression of a man fighting multiple logistical fires simultaneously. Bad day? She said. Manageable, he said, which was the answer he gave to that question regardless of the reality. She moved past him into the garage and looked at the Mustang. It looked worse now than when it had arrived. Partly disassembled, hood up, interior stripped out, parts in labeled bins on the workbench. The kind of organized chaos that looks like destruction to anyone who doesn't understand the process. It looks worse, she said. That's normal. You said that would happen. I did. She walked around the car slowly. You've taken almost everything apart. I needed to see all of it. You can't fix what you can't see. He came up beside her, slightly behind. The frame is actually in better shape than I expected. Whoever stored it in that garage was keeping the climate reasonably stable. There's rust, but it's surface rust in most places. Structurally, she's solid. Victoria looked at the stripped interior. The old seats removed, the dash pulled out, wiring exposed. It's strange, she said, seeing it this way. She stopped. Like looking at something that's been taken apart to be understood. He didn't say anything to that. She turned to face him. I have a question, and I'd like you to answer it honestly. I usually do. Can you actually finish this in the time we have? He looked at her. He thought about the missing valve cover, the gaskets, the 3 contacts he was still waiting to hear back from, the late nights ahead, the 10,000 small decisions still to be made. Yes, he said. How sure? 70%. She blinked. 70? Would you prefer I said 100? I'd prefer the truth. Then 70. The 30% I can't account for is parts sourcing and time. If I hit a sourcing wall on a critical component, the timeline breaks down. But I don't think I will. I know this engine. He paused. I know it better than I've known most things. She looked at him. How? He turned back to the car. He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. A long time ago, he said, I was in an engineering program, graduate level. My thesis was on mechanical optimization in rare American engine series from the 1960s. K-codes were my focus. He picked up a wrench from the workbench and set it down again, just to have something to do with his hands. I was going to go work for a major manufacturer, had an offer, had everything lined up. He stopped. Then it fell apart. What happened? He looked at her then, directly, and something moved through his eyes. Not sadness exactly, more like the look of someone who has made peace with a thing but hasn't forgotten it. That's a long story, he said, and I've got a valve cover to track down before 5 o'clock. She let it go. She was good at knowing when to push and when to wait, and right now was not the time. I'll be back Thursday, she said. Parts permitting, he said. She almost smiled at that. Almost. It was on day 11 that Ethan found the letter. He was working on the dashboard, removing the instrument cluster, cleaning the wiring harness, the kind of detailed work that required good light and complete focus. He'd set up an extra work lamp angled into the dash cavity, and he was reaching into a corner near the right side of the firewall when his fingers found something that wasn't metal or wire or any component he'd been expecting. Paper. He stopped moving. He reached in more carefully and worked it loose. An envelope, cream-colored, thick stock, the kind people used for formal correspondence, sealed with wax that had hardened and cracked over the decades, but still held. It had been placed deliberately behind a bracket near the steering column, tucked in a way that suggested someone had wanted it hidden but retrievable. On the front, in firm handwriting, for Victoria. Ethan sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long time. The handwriting was steady and deliberate, the kind that belongs to someone who was precise about things. He didn't recognize it, but the envelope had clearly been placed there intentionally, in a car belonging to a man who had owned it for 40 years and never let anyone near it. He set it on the cleanest corner of the workbench, away from the oil and the tools, and he left it there. He called Dana. There's an envelope, he said, found inside the dashboard. Addressed to Victoria, in what looks like older handwriting. I don't know if it's her father's, but it was hidden inside the car. A pause. Have you opened it? No? Why not? He looked at the envelope across the garage. Because it's addressed to her. Another pause, longer this time. I'll tell her. Don't tell her over the phone, he said. She should come see it. Victoria arrived the next morning. She was earlier than he'd expected, before 8, which meant she'd probably left the city before 6, which meant she hadn't slept much. She came into the garage without knocking, the way she'd started to do, which he found he didn't mind, and she went directly to the workbench where the envelope sat. She didn't pick it up right away. She stood over it and looked at it. Her hands were at her sides. That's his writing, she said. Very quiet. I figured. Where was it? Behind the instrument cluster on the right side, tucked behind a bracket near the firewall, deliberately placed. She reached out and picked it up, turned it over. The wax seal on the back was his father's. She could see it, a small monogram she recognized from formal correspondence throughout her childhood. "He sealed it," she said. "Yeah. He put it there and he sealed it, and She stopped. "He sent the car away in 2019. He was already sick by then. He wouldn't have been able to restore it himself. He must have known someone else would eventually find this." Ethan said nothing. Victoria stood with the envelope in her hands for a while. Her face was controlled, the way it always was, but something underneath was working hard at the edges of that control. Then she put the envelope in her jacket pocket. "I'll open it when I'm ready," she said. "Okay." She looked around the garage, visibly working to shift her focus back to something concrete. "Where are you with the carburetor?" "Rebuilt and ready to install, waiting on one more gasket." "The valve cover?" "Arrived yesterday. It's in good shape. Need to clean it, but it'll work." She nodded. "Good." She looked at the car. "Good." She stayed for 2 hours that morning, which was longer than any of her previous visits. She didn't hover or ask unnecessary questions. She mostly just sat in a folding chair near the workbench and watched him work, occasionally asking something specific when she wanted to understand a process, and mostly being quiet. Ethan noticed that she had a quality he didn't often see in people with her level of power and money. She could sit still and not talk without it becoming uncomfortable. Most people in her position felt the need to fill space. She didn't. Lily arrived around noon, dropped off by her after-school program. She came into the garage, set her backpack down, and immediately looked at Victoria with the direct assessment of a child who hasn't yet learned to be indirect about anything. "You're her," Lily said. "I'm probably her," Victoria said. "You own the car." "I do." "My dad says it's the hardest thing he's ever worked on." Ethan, from under the dashboard, said, "I said it's one of the most complex. There's a difference." "He said hardest," Lily told Victoria, perfectly conversational. Victoria looked at the car. "I believe him." Lily sat down with her book, then looked back up. "What's your name?" "Victoria." "That's a long name." "It is." "Do you have a short version?" A tiny pause. "People who know me well sometimes call me Vic." Lily considered this with great seriousness. "Okay," she said, and went back to her book. The days stacked up. 14 of them, then 16, then 18, each one a progression of small victories and frustrating setbacks, and late evenings and early mornings, and the steady accumulating logic of rebuilding something piece by piece. Ethan replaced every rubber component he found, rebuilt the carburetor, sourced and installed both valve covers, replaced the brake lines and bled the system, flushed the fuel system and replaced the lines, rebuilt the water pump, cleaned and tested the alternator, addressed a cracked exhaust manifold that would have caused problems nobody wanted. He also, along the way, began to recognize something. The more he opened this engine, the more he looked at its architecture, its specific design choices, the way the components related to each other, the more he felt a strange, disorienting sense of familiarity. Not just general familiarity with the type, something more specific, something that pulled at the edges of his memory. He'd written his engineering thesis on high-performance engines from this era. The K-code had been his primary subject. He'd spent 3 years of his life understanding these machines in a way that most people never did. But there was something specific here. Something about the way a modification had been made to the engine mounts. Something about a particular choice in the fuel delivery system. Things that weren't standard. He photographed the anomalies and sat with them for a day, turning them over in his mind. Then he called Victoria. "There are some modifications to your father's engine," he said. "Non-factory, custom work, done by someone who knew what they were doing. Whoever did it made some choices that are specific." "Is that a problem?" "Not mechanically. The car will run fine, but the choices are interesting." He paused. "Where did your father get this car originally?" "He bought it in 1978 from a private seller. I don't know much more than that." "Do you have any documentation, title history, anything?" "I can have Dana look through the estate files." "That would be helpful." She was quiet for a moment. "Why does it matter?" Probably doesn't, he said, but I like to understand the full picture. He hung up and went back to the engine and stood over it in the way he'd been doing more and more, not working, just looking, just thinking. Something about this car was pulling at him. He couldn't put his finger on it yet. It was like a word at the edge of his memory, present, almost graspable, then gone when he reached for it. He pushed it aside and went back to work. He had 25 days left and half an engine to reassemble. On day 18, he turned the key. He hadn't told Victoria he was going to try it. He hadn't made an announcement or set up an audience. Lily was there, sitting in her chair, reading, or pretending to read while actually watching him. Ethan stood beside the car for a moment, hand on the roof. He had put this engine back together piece by piece, component by component, over 18 days. He had cleaned and rebuilt and replaced and adjusted. He had done the work the way he always did it, completely, without shortcuts, without guessing. Either it was right or it wasn't. He got in. The leather, now repaired and conditioned, no longer cracked under him. The steering wheel, whilst wrapped in fresh material, sat straight. The instrument cluster was clean and the gauges were functional. He put the key in the ignition. He looked through the windshield at the garage wall for a moment. He turned the key. For half a second, nothing. Then the engine caught. And then it roared. Not sputtered, not turned over reluctantly. Roared, deep and immediate and enormous in the space of the garage. A sound that was the opposite of 40 years of silence. A sound that filled every corner and vibrated in the walls and made the tools on the bench hum faintly against each other. Ethan sat behind the wheel with his hands light on it and listened. The engine settled into a steady, powerful idle. Smooth, properly tuned, the way it was supposed to sound in 1967, when it left the factory and had its whole life ahead of it. From her chair in the corner, Lily looked up from her book. Her eyes were wide. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah, you did it." He didn't say anything for a moment. He just listened. "Yeah," he said. "I did." He turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, the garage felt different, larger somehow, or rearranged, like the space had shifted to accommodate what had just happened. He got out of the car and pulled out his phone and called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. "It started," he said. A long silence on the other end. "Victoria." "I'm here," she said. Her voice was different, smaller, and she was working to keep it level and not entirely succeeding. "Say it again." "The engine started. She runs. She's running clean and smooth and the way she was supposed to run 58 years ago." Another silence. "I'll be there tomorrow morning," she said. "First thing." "Okay." She hung up. Ethan set his phone down and looked at the Mustang sitting in the middle of his garage. Restored, awake, alive in a way it hadn't been for 40 years. Behind him, Lily had abandoned all pretense of reading and was standing beside her chair. "Can I sit in it?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "When?" He thought about this. "When the right person has had their chance first." Lily accepted this with her characteristic gravity. She sat back down, picked up her book again. Outside, the Virginia afternoon was warm and golden, that same light that made everything look gentler than it actually was. But inside the garage, something had woken up, and the thing that had woken up was only part of what was about to come. Victoria arrived at 7:43 in the morning. Ethan knew this because he'd been there since 6, and he heard the SUV pull in, and he checked his watch out of habit. She was earlier than she'd said she'd be, which told him something about how she'd slept the night before. Probably not well. Probably not much. She came through the bay doors without knocking. She'd stopped doing that somewhere around day 5, and she stood at the entrance for a moment, looking at the Mustang. The car looked different now than it had 3 weeks ago. The rust had been treated and addressed. The bodywork was in progress. Not finished, not painted, but clean and solid, the old gray primer coat stripped in sections to reveal the original metal beneath. The chrome details on the grille had been pulled and were currently soaking in a cleaning solution on the workbench. The interior was reassembled and repaired. And under that hood, which was currently up the way a book sits open, was an engine that had run yesterday for the first time in 40 years. Victoria looked at all of this without speaking. Then she said, "Start it again." Ethan was standing by the workbench with his coffee. He set the mug down, wiped his hands on the shop rag at his belt, and walked to the car. He got in. He turned the key. The engine started on the first try, exactly as it had the night before, and the sound it made in the garage was the same enormous, unhesitant roar, deep and even, the kind of mechanical voice that seems to come from somewhere deeper than just metal and fuel. Victoria stood with her arms at her sides and her eyes on the hood. Ethan watched her from behind the wheel. She didn't cry. He'd half expected that, not because she seemed like someone who cried easily, but because she was clearly holding something in reserve, and the sound of that engine seemed like exactly the kind of thing that might finally breach it. But she didn't cry. Her jaw tightened, her hands closed slowly at her sides. She breathed in once, deep, and held it. Then she let it out. "Thank you," she said. Not loudly, just the two words. He turned the engine off. "Still 25 days of work to go," he said, climbing out. "Body, paint, trim, final tuning. It runs, but it's not done." "I know." She moved closer, touched the side of the car with her palm flat against the door. "I know it's not done, but it runs." She paused. "He said it would run. He said he'd fix it, and it would run, and we'd drive it." She took her hand back. "It runs." Ethan didn't say anything to that. Some moments don't need filling. She stood beside the car for another minute, then turned. She was back in her usual operating mode. The switch was visible, a small conscious adjustment in her posture and her expression. "The envelope is in my hotel room," she said. "I haven't opened it yet." "You don't have to explain that to me." "I know." She looked at him. "I just want you to know I haven't forgotten about it." "I wasn't going to ask." She almost said something else, then didn't. Instead, she moved toward the workbench and looked at the spread of parts and tools, the organized system he'd built over 18 days that made sense only to him. "What's next?" she asked. He pulled the legal pad from the shelf above the bench and handed it to her. She read through it, quickly, with the focused efficiency of someone who processes information fast. And he watched her eyes move down the page and registered the small reactions she couldn't completely suppress. A slight tightening around the eyes at the cost of certain components, a small nod at the timeline he'd laid out. "The paint is the part I'm most concerned about," he said. "Getting the original Brittany blue matched correctly takes time and the right shop. I've already contacted a specialist in Richmond who works with vintage restoration colors. He says he can match it, but he needs the car in his shop for at least 4 days. Can we afford 4 days? If we go next week. It's tight, but it works." She handed the legal pad back. "Set it up." He nodded. He picked up his coffee, found it had gone completely cold, and drank it anyway. "There's something else," he said. She looked at him. "The modifications I mentioned on the phone, the non-factory work on the engine, I've been thinking about it and I want to show you something." He moved to the workbench and picked up his phone, opened the photos. He documented every unusual component, every non-standard choice, with careful close-up shots. He handed the phone to her. These modifications were done by someone with serious technical knowledge, not a garage mechanic doing weekend work, someone who understood engine optimization at an engineering level. Victoria looked through the photos. "My father wasn't a mechanic." "I know. Whoever did this work wasn't employed by your father, or at least wasn't just a mechanic. The choices they made were specific and technically sophisticated." He took the phone back. "I keep coming back to something. The style of these modifications, the approach, it reminds me of methods I learned in school. Graduate-level engineering, very specific to a particular program and a particular era." She looked at him steadily. "Which program?" He set the phone down. "Virginia Tech, Mechanical Engineering, class of 2009. I was in a graduate research cohort that specialized in high-performance automotive systems from the American muscle car era." He paused. "We developed certain methodologies, ways of approaching fuel delivery, engine mounting, airflow optimization. This work," he gestured at the phone, at the car behind them, "this work is consistent with those methods." She was quiet for a moment. "You think someone from your program worked on this car?" I think it's possible. It might be nothing, but the timing. He stopped. Your father acquired the car in 1978. The modifications I'm looking at were made later than that. Based on the materials and techniques, I'd estimate early 2000s, which is when I was in school. That's a strange coincidence. Yes, he said, it is. She looked at him with the direct, measured expression she used when she was thinking rather than reacting. Or it isn't a coincidence at all. He didn't answer that, but the silence between them held the same thought. I'll have Dana pull the estate files, she said. Service records, anything related to the car going back 15 years. That would help. She pulled out her phone, then stopped. She looked at the car again, and then at him, and he could see her making a decision. Not about the car, not about the files, about something else. When you were in that program, she said. What happened? You said it fell apart. What does that mean? It was the second time she'd asked. The first time he'd deflected. He was quiet for a moment, and she waited, not pushing, just holding the space. I was accused of academic misconduct, he said. Plagiarism and data falsification specifically. My thesis was flagged by an anonymous complaint filed to the Department Review Board. They launched an investigation. Her expression didn't change, but she was listening with her whole attention. The investigation found what they said was evidence. Irregularities in my research data, similarities between my methodology documentation and another researcher's unpublished work. He picked up the shop rag from his belt and put it back, just to have something to do with his hands. The thing is, the evidence was wrong. My data was clean. The methodology similarities existed because we'd been in the same research group and developed approaches together. That's how collaborative research works. But when the complaint came in, the board wanted resolution, and resolution meant someone had to be responsible. And that was you. I was the one without connections. My advisor had left the program the previous year. I didn't have anyone with enough institutional weight to push back. He looked at the car. I was removed from the program. My engineering credentials were suspended pending review. The review took 2 years. By the time it concluded, the offer I'd had from a major manufacturer was gone, my reputation in the field was gone, and I was 27 years old with a half-finished graduate career and nothing to show for it. What did the review conclude? Inconclusive, which means they couldn't prove I'd done anything wrong, but they also didn't formally clear me. It just stopped. Everything just stopped. He paused. I left Virginia for a while, came back. Ended up in Caldwell because a man there offered me a job in his garage, and the job was honest work and nobody asked too many questions, and eventually I bought the place from him. He shrugged once, a small, tight movement. That's the story. Victoria was looking at him with something that wasn't quite sympathy. It was more precise than that, more like the expression of someone who is categorizing information and finding that it matters more than they expected. What was the name of the person who filed the complaint? She asked. I never found out officially. Anonymous. But the board had a faculty liaison who oversaw the process, a man named Hargrove. And there was a financier attached to the engineering department, a private donor who funded the research program. His name was Damian Blackwell. The name landed in the air between them. Victoria's expression changed, just slightly, just enough. You know that name, Ethan said. She looked at him for a long moment. Damian Blackwell, she said carefully, is currently attempting to acquire my company. The garage was very quiet. From outside came the sound of a car passing on the road, distant and brief, then silence again. That's a significant coincidence, Ethan said. Yes, she said. It is. And she said it the same way she'd said the earlier one, like a statement that was also a question, pointing at something neither of them could see clearly yet. She left an hour later, earlier than she'd planned to. She said she had calls to make. She looked, for the first time since he'd met her, like someone who was working hard to appear unhurried. Ethan watched the SUV pull out of the lot, then went back to the car. He stood over the open engine for a long time. Then he picked up his tools and went back to work. Dana called that evening while Ethan was eating dinner with Lily at their kitchen table. Pasta, because Lily had decided 2 months ago that she wanted pasta on Tuesdays and had not been persuaded otherwise. The estate files came through, Dana said. "I've been going through them for the past 3 hours. There's a service record for the Mustang that goes back to 2003. That's the earliest we have." "Who performed the service?" "A shop called Meridian Automotive in Charlottesville. The record shows a substantial amount of work, engine modifications, component upgrades. The invoice is detailed." A pause. "The sign-off on the work order is someone listed as a contractor. First name Ethan." The kitchen went very quiet. Across the table, Lily was twirling pasta and not looking up. Ethan sat very still. "Last name?" he said. "The last name is partially illegible. The scan is old and the carbon copy is degraded. It starts with a C." He put his fork down. "When exactly in 2003? "The invoice is dated March 15th, 2003. He thought back. March 2003. He'd been in his second year of graduate school. He'd done some private contracting work to cover living expenses. It was common in the program, working on private clients' vehicles to supplement the stipend. He'd done several jobs that spring. He couldn't remember every job, but he remembered Charlottesville. "I need to see that document," he said. "I'll have it scanned and emailed to you tonight." "Dana." He stopped. "Does Victoria know what you found?" "I found it 20 minutes ago. I called you first because I thought you might want to know before she did." He wasn't sure why she'd made that choice, but he said, "Thank you." After he hung up, Lily looked at him across the table. "What happened?" she said. She was 8. She could read a room perfectly. "Nothing bad," he said. "Something confusing." "Does it have to do with the car?" "Yeah." She went back to her pasta. "You'll figure it out," she said, with the complete confidence of someone who believes this without reservation. He looked at his daughter and felt the familiar composite of exhaustion and gratitude and something else. Something like the weight of 15 years of a life that hadn't gone the way it was supposed to. And the strange, vertiginous sense that it might be about to. "Maybe," he said. "Definitely," she said. He didn't argue. You don't argue with an 8-year-old who's already decided. The document arrived at 9:47. He sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and opened it, and spent the next hour going through every page. It was his work. He knew it the moment he looked at the specifications. He recognized the notations, the organization system, the way he documented the fuel delivery modifications. He'd developed that system himself during his first year in the program, and he'd used it on every private job he took. He had worked on this car. He had modified this engine. 15 years ago, before his life fell apart, he had put his hands inside this exact engine and made changes to it that were still there today, that he had recognized without knowing what he was recognizing. He sat back and stared at the ceiling for a while. There was a version of this that was simply coincidence, a small town, an old car, a name from a career he no longer had. It happened. Life folded back on itself sometimes in ways that were strange but meant nothing. But the other name kept appearing alongside it. Damian Blackwell, connected to his program, connected now, 15 years later, to Victoria's company. That was harder to fold away into coincidence. He closed the laptop and went to bed. He didn't sleep until past 2. He told Victoria in person. She arrived mid-morning 2 days later, and he laid it out for her at the workbench. The document Dana had found, what it meant, the date, his memory of the work. She listened without interrupting. She had the ability to be completely still when receiving important information. No fidgeting, no filling the silences, just absolute attention. It was a quality he'd noticed before and respected, because it was rare. When he finished, she said, "You worked on my father's car." "In 2003, before any of this, before I ever knew you existed. Before your career collapsed." "Yes." She looked at the car, sitting solid and blue-primed in the center of the garage. "And the year after that, an anonymous complaint destroyed your program and your career." "Yes." "And the person who funded the research program, who had access and influence and motive to interfere with a graduate student's career, is the same man now trying to buy my company." "I can't prove any connection," he said immediately. "What I'm telling you is facts and timeline, not conclusions." "I know the difference." She looked back at him. "But you're thinking the same thing I am." He was quiet for a moment. I'm thinking there are a lot of strange overlaps. I'm thinking there's nothing strange about them, she said. I'm thinking someone knew. Someone knew you'd done this work, and someone knew you were good enough to be a threat to them someday, or someone had a different reason. I don't know the reason yet. And they used what access they had to shut you down before you became a problem. That's a serious accusation. I'm not accusing anyone yet. I'm laying out a sequence. She crossed her arms and looked at the floor, a habit she had when she was thinking hard. Blackwell has been a presence around my father's business for 20 years. He positioned himself close to everything my father valued. He invests in research programs, in engineering schools, in legacy institutions. Not because he loves those things, because proximity is power. She looked up. My father trusted him for years. But in the last period before he died, in those final months, something changed. My father went quiet about Blackwell, stopped mentioning him, started reviewing contracts and restructuring certain agreements. You think your father discovered something? I think my father suspected something, and then he died before he could... She stopped. Before he could do anything about it. The envelope sat unsaid between them. She hadn't mentioned it. He didn't bring it up. What do you want to do? He asked. She looked at the car for a long moment. First, I want you to finish the restoration. That doesn't change. The gala is in 23 days and the car needs to be there. Agreed. Second, she unfolded her arms and straightened. I have a legal team and an investigations team within my company. Discreet, experienced people. I'm going to point them at Blackwell and at the history of that engineering program. If there's a connection to be found, they'll find it. Victoria. He said her name for the first time without her offering it, and they both noticed. If this goes somewhere, if Blackwell is connected to what happened to me, that's potentially criminal. It's not just a corporate dispute. I know that. I'm not saying stop. I'm saying be careful about how you move. If he finds out you're looking, he's going to find out eventually, she said. People like Blackwell always do. What matters is finding enough before he has time to react. She picked up her bag from the workbench where she'd set it down. I've been dealing with Damien Blackwell in boardrooms for 6 months, Ethan. I know how he operates. He's deliberate and he's patient, and he's been building this acquisition approach for 2 years. She met his eyes. So have I. She left to make calls. He went back to the engine and the work, and the 23 days still in front of him. The Richmond paint specialist's name was Carl Beaumont, and he was 64 years old and had been matching vintage automotive colors for 37 years, and he had the opinion of a man who has been right about things for a very long time and knows it. He walked around the Mustang in his shop with his hands behind his back, not touching anything, just looking. Brittany Blue, he said, after a long while. That's what the original spec says, Ethan told him. I know what the original spec says. I also know that every Brittany Blue Mustang that's been sitting in a dark garage for 40 years doesn't actually want the factory Brittany Blue when it comes back. It wants something fractionally different. The original color, aged correctly in your eye, reads slightly different than the factory chip. He looked at Ethan. Are you a purist? I want it to look like what it was supposed to look like. Whether that's exactly the factory spec or the closest to it, that's your call. Carl Beaumont nodded once, the nod of a man who has been asked the right question. 4 days, he said. Leave the car. Ethan left the car. He drove back to Caldwell feeling the absence of it, which was strange. He'd been living with this machine for 3 weeks. His hands knew its contours. The space it occupied in his shop felt different now with it gone. He spent those 4 days on other work. The ordinary jobs he'd kept ticking along in the background, the sedan in the lot that needed new brake pads, a truck with a transmission problem that had been waiting longer than it should have. He did the work, and he thought about Damien Blackwell, and he thought about his thesis, and he thought about March 2003 and a job in Charlottesville that had stayed in his hands without him knowing. Victoria's investigation team had already found something. She'd told him in a brief call on the first day the car was at Carl's shop. There are financial ties between Blackwell and a man named Professor Gerald Hargrove, she said. Hargrove, the name Ethan had mentioned, the faculty liaison. Consulting fees paid through a Blackwell subsidiary over a period of 4 years from 2002 to 2006. The payment started the year you entered the program. Ethan had sat with that for a while. That's not proof of anything, he said. No, she agreed, but it's a thread. My team is pulling it. On day 3, Dana called with a different piece of information. The estate files she'd been reviewing had turned up correspondence, not emails, actual letters, handwritten, between Victoria's father and Damian Blackwell from the late 2000s. Most of it was business, dense, and boring, and exactly what it appeared to be. But in one letter, from 2008, Blackwell referenced a regrettable situation at Virginia Tech and expressed to Victoria's father his hope that the matter had been handled appropriately. He gave no further details. The phrase was elegant in its uselessness. It meant everything and proved nothing, but it meant something. Ethan. Victoria's voice on the phone was controlled, but underneath it was something with real edges. I think Blackwell knew what was done to you. I think he either ordered it or approved it after the fact. And I think my father may have known too. The silence that followed was the kind that needed a moment before either of them could walk back into it. Your father hired me, Ethan said finally. I mean, I worked on that car in 2003 as a private contractor. Your father's car. Your father knew my work. Yes. If he later learned what was done, he might have felt responsible, indirectly. Her voice was careful, measured, like she was moving through something fragile. He stayed close to Blackwell for years after that. He trusted him. And if he eventually realized Blackwell had done something wrong using that proximity, using access that my father's world had given him, she stopped. That's the kind of thing a man might not know how to fix, might not know how to face, and might, if he was dying and running out of time, put into a letter and hide somewhere he hoped would eventually be found. The envelope. Neither of them had said the word, but they were both thinking it. You should open it, Ethan said. I know. You don't have to tell me what's in it. A pause. I think I might need to, she said. If what I'm imagining is in there, if he wrote what I think he wrote, then it affects you. And you should know. He didn't say anything to that. Tomorrow, she said. I'll open it tomorrow. She hung up, and he sat in his empty shop in Caldwell, and outside the evening was coming down over the town the way it always did. Slowly, without drama, the sky going orange and then pink and then a deep fading blue. The same color, actually, as a 1967 Mustang fastback that was currently in a shop in Richmond getting its original life handed back to it. Carl Beaumont called on day 4 to say the car was ready. Ethan drove to Richmond in the morning and stood in the doorway of Carl's shop and looked at the Mustang, and for a moment he didn't say anything. The blue was exactly right, not just the color, though the color was extraordinary, deep and true and alive in a way the old faded gray had never been. It was the quality of it, the way the light moved across the curves of the fastback body, the way the paint sat on the metal like something that had always been there and had simply been recovered rather than applied. Well, Carl said behind him. It's right, Ethan said. Of course it is. Ethan walked around it slowly. The chrome was back, grille, trim, the details he'd pulled and cleaned, the tires were new, period appropriate in profile. The interior was visible through the clean glass, repaired and restored to something very close to what it would have looked like in the year it was built. He crouched near the rear quarter and looked at the line of the fender, stood up and looked at the whole car. Your father would have, Carl started. It's not my car, Ethan said. Carl was quiet for a moment. Whose is it? A woman named Victoria Ashford. Her father owned it. Is she going to like it? Ethan looked at the blue Mustang sitting in Carl Beaumont's shop, restored and real and more alive than it had any right to be. Yeah, he said. She's going to like it. He loaded the car onto the transport trailer himself, working carefully, checking the straps twice. He drove back to Caldwell with the Mustang visible in his mirrors, blue and whole and heading home. When he pulled into the lot and backed the trailer in and got the car down and rolled it into its spot in the garage, he stood back and looked at it under the overhead lights. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. I opened the letter. He stared at those 4 words for a moment. Then he typed back, Are you okay? A long pause. Then, "Come by the hotel tomorrow morning. There are things I need to tell you." He set the phone down and looked at the car. The work was almost done. The car was almost finished. 21 days from a 43-day deadline still lay ahead, with details and final tuning and the 10,000 small finishing steps that separated almost done from actually done. But the big thing, the thing that had seemed impossible when Marcus Webb stood over this engine in Chicago and called it a lost cause, was finished. The car was restored. It was running. It was blue again and real again. And whatever was in that letter, whatever Victoria had found when she opened what her father had left her, it was going to change what happened next. Ethan Cross stood in his garage in Caldwell, Virginia, with grease still on his hands from a long day and a Brittany blue Mustang sitting 6 feet away from him. And he understood, without being able to say exactly how, that the hardest part of all of this was still ahead. Not the mechanical part. That he'd handled. The human part. That was something else entirely. The hotel Victoria was staying at was a quiet place on the edge of town, the kind of establishment that catered to business travelers who needed a clean room and reliable Wi-Fi and didn't particularly care about anything else. She'd been using it as a base for her visits to Caldwell rather than driving back to the city each time, which told Ethan something about how seriously she was taking all of this. Victoria Ashford did not strike him as a woman who stayed in mid-range Virginia hotels unless she had a reason. He arrived at 8 in the morning. She opened the door before he knocked. She'd probably heard the truck in the lot, or seen it from the window. She looked like she hadn't slept. Not dramatically so. She was dressed and composed, hair pulled back, the same controlled exterior she always wore. But there were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there 3 days ago, and something in her face had shifted. Some weight had been added, or maybe some weight had been removed, which sometimes looks the same. She stepped back to let him in. The room had a small table near the window, and on it sat a coffee maker, 2 cups, and the envelope. The envelope was open now, the flap torn carefully, and beside it a folded letter in the same cream-colored paper, 3 pages from the look of it, the handwriting dense and deliberate. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She poured coffee without asking whether he wanted any, which he found he didn't mind. She sat across from him and put her hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment, organizing something internally. "He wrote it in the last months," she said. "The letter. You can tell from the handwriting. It's still his, still controlled, but slower. More deliberate than is usual. I think it took him a long time to write." She picked up the coffee cup, didn't drink from it. "He addresses me by my full name at the start. He only did that when something was serious." Ethan waited. "He starts by talking about the car, about what it meant to him when he bought it. He was 26, just starting to build the company, barely had enough money to buy it, but did it anyway because he'd always wanted one, and he thought," he actually wrote this, "he thought a man who doesn't let himself want things stops knowing what he's working toward." She looked up briefly. That's very him. He had a way of framing practical decisions as philosophy. She unfolded the letter partway, not to read from it, just to have it in her hands. "He talks about the drive we were supposed to take. When I was 9. He remembered the promise. He wrote that he knew he'd let it pass, that he'd kept meaning to fix the car, and kept meaning to take me, and kept finding reasons why this weekend wasn't the right time, or this month, or this year." Her voice remained level. "He said that by the time he understood what that kind of delay costs, it was too late to correct it." Ethan sat very still. Then he talks about Damien Blackwell. The name in the quiet hotel room sounded different than it had in the garage. Harder, more real. They met in 2001. Blackwell approached my father as an investor. He had connections to the engineering and manufacturing sectors, and Ashford Industries was expanding into infrastructure contracts. It was a good fit on paper. Blackwell had money and access. My father had a growing company and ambition. She set the letter down and picked up her coffee this time, held it with both hands. What my father didn't know until much later was that Blackwell had a pattern. He found companies in growth phases, inserted himself as an investor and advisor, built leverage over years, and then used that leverage to position himself for either a takeover or a controlling stake. He was patient. He could spend 5 years cultivating a relationship before he made his actual move. And your father didn't see it coming. My father trusted him, which is not a small thing. My father was not a trusting man by nature. He was careful and skeptical, and he'd been burned before. But Blackwell was very good at being exactly what someone needed him to be. She looked out the window at the parking lot, at nothing in particular. In 2003, Blackwell was also funding an engineering research program at Virginia Tech. He did this with several institutions. It was part of his positioning: access to developing talent, access to research, relationships with faculty. She paused. He mentioned to my father, sometime around early 2003, that there was a promising young engineer in one of the programs he supported, someone who had done private contracting work for a client, my father's Mustang. Blackwell apparently found this out through the faculty connection, through Hargrove. Ethan absorbed that. Blackwell knew I worked on the car. He knew you were good. He knew you were connected, however indirectly, to my father's world. And he knew... She stopped. She set her coffee down. He knew that my father had been impressed. He'd seen the work order, or been told about it. And apparently my father had expressed in casual conversation that he'd like to know who the mechanic was. Just an offhand comment, the kind of thing you say and forget. Blackwell didn't forget. No. She folded her hands on the table. My father wrote that he didn't know for years what Blackwell had done. He knew you'd been removed from the program. Blackwell told him that himself, framed it as an unfortunate situation, a promising student who'd made poor choices. He used the word unfortunate 3 times, according to my father. He remembered that specifically. Her jaw tightened. It wasn't until 2018, when my father was restructuring some agreements ahead of the illness he didn't yet know was coming, that he found financial records he hadn't been meant to see. Consulting fees paid to Hargrove, documentation of conversations between Blackwell and the Department Review Board, evidence that Blackwell had manufactured the complaint, coordinated the investigation, and used his financial leverage over the program to ensure the outcome. The room was very quiet. Why? Ethan said. His voice came out flat and even, which was not exactly what was happening inside him, but he kept it there. Why would Blackwell go after a graduate student? What possible threat was I to him? Victoria looked at him directly. According to my father's letter, and this is the part that took me the longest to understand, it wasn't about you specifically, not at first. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Blackwell had a business interest in a specific automotive patent, a methodology related to high-performance engine optimization for vintage American systems. He was positioning to acquire it through a shell company. The patent was in dispute with a research institution, the same institution where your work was being done. Your thesis, if completed, would have contributed to the institution's claim on the intellectual property. Ethan stared at her. Your research, she said quietly, was inconvenient to a business deal worth approximately $40 million. The silence that followed was the kind that comes after something large has been said and needs a moment before the room can hold it properly. $40 million. His career, 15 years of living small, of building back from nothing in a town nobody remembered, of raising Lily alone in a garage apartment, of becoming someone entirely different from who he'd been trained to be, had been the collateral damage of a $40 million real estate move on an intellectual property deal. He looked at the table. Ethan. He looked up. I'm sorry, Victoria said, and she said it in a way that didn't have any performance in it. No careful calibration, no executive polish. Just the words, direct and tired and real. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't fix what 15 years looks like. But I'm telling you that my father was sorry, and I am sorry, and what was done to you was wrong and deliberate, and I intend to prove it. He was quiet for a long moment. What else did the letter say? He asked. She glanced down at the pages. He talks about Blackwell's current acquisition attempt. He'd been aware of it in the early stages. He was sick by then, but still engaged, still watching. He believed Blackwell had been working toward owning a piece of Ashford Industries for years, that the whole relationship, from 2001 onward, was a long game toward exactly that. He wrote that he'd been restructuring agreements and removing Blackwell's leverage points quietly, so as not to alarm him, but that he hadn't had time to finish. She looked up. He left me instructions, names of contacts, specific documents to find, and a single instruction written at the end of the letter, underlined twice. She looked down at the page, and for the first time her voice changed. Something came into it, something that was not professional distance. He wrote, "Find the engineer. Make it right." Ethan looked at the open envelope on the table, the cream paper and the wax seal, and 40 years of a car waiting in a dark garage. He knew, Ethan said. He suspected. He didn't know you were the same person until... She stopped. He didn't know your last name. The service record from 2003 listed you as Ethan C. He never made the connection, but he knew someone had been wronged. He knew the shape of it, even if he didn't have all the names. And he hid the letter in the car, because he knew the car would eventually find its way to someone who could fix it. He knew it would be opened. He knew that whoever found it would tell me. She paused. I think, in whatever way he could still act at the end, he was trying to set it right. Ethan sat with that for a while. Outside, a truck moved through the parking lot, its engine audible briefly and then gone. The morning light came through the window at a low angle and hit the table and the letter and the envelope and made everything look more solid than it felt. Okay, he said finally. She looked at him. Okay? Okay, what's the plan? Something moved across her face. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or just the particular feeling of having someone say yes when the ask was a large one. My investigation team has been building a file for the past week, she said, moving back into the register she used when she was working. Financial ties between Blackwell and Hargrove, the patent dispute documentation, gaps in the review board's process that suggest coordination. None of it is conclusive individually, but together... She picked up her phone, opened something, turned it toward him. Together it builds a picture. He looked at the document she was showing him. It was dense, financial data, dates, names, cross-referenced connections. Someone had done serious work in a short time. The acquisition vote is in 12 days, she said. Blackwell has been purchasing shares through subsidiaries for 18 months. He needs 42% to force a controlling stake agreement under our current charter. He's at 38. He needs 4 more percent, which he's positioned to get through 2 smaller investor groups he's been cultivating. If the vote goes through, he has the power to restructure the board, which means he can remove me as CEO and reshape the company's direction. She took the phone back. I've been fighting this for 6 months in boardrooms and legal channels, but I've been fighting it without knowing what I know now, without the letter, without the connection to your history. You're going to take it public. Not publicly, not yet. I'm going to take it to the board directly. Present the evidence of Blackwell's pattern, the academic misconduct he orchestrated, the financial irregularities in his acquisition approach. If I can demonstrate that his investment behavior has consistently involved manipulating systems to eliminate obstacles. She paused. The investor groups he's cultivating are institutional. They have compliance obligations. If they understand what Blackwell actually is, they pull their support. And if they don't? She looked at him steadily. Then I find another way. But I've been in this industry for 10 years, Ethan. I know how to fight for a company. She paused. What I needed was to know what I was actually fighting. And now I do. He nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Your testimony, eventually, if it comes to that. Your documentation, whatever you kept from the review process. Anything that places your work on this car, connects you to the program, and establishes the timeline. She hesitated. And I need you to finish the car. Whatever comes next. The gala is in 21 days and the car should be there. It matters. It's almost done, he said. A week of finish work, final tuning, detailing. I can have it ready with time to spare. Good. She stood, which was the signal that the meeting was shifting from conversation to action. I'll have my legal team reach out to you this week to begin formalizing your account. Don't discuss this with anyone outside of that process. Who would I tell? He said. She looked at him. Fair point. He stood, picked up the coffee cup he'd barely touched. Victoria. She paused, already in motion. What you said earlier about your father, about the letter. He stopped, not sure exactly what he was going to say, then said it anyway. He didn't fix the car. He didn't take you for the drive. He had 15 years to do the right thing, and he didn't. He paused. I don't know how you're doing with all of that. I'm not going to pretend I understand what it's like to read something like that from someone who's gone. He looked at the table, at the envelope. But for what it's worth, he didn't just hide it. He planned for it. He put it somewhere it would be found. That's not nothing. Victoria looked at the envelope for a long moment. No, she said quietly. It isn't. She picked up the letter and folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then she put the envelope in the inside pocket of her jacket, close, the way you carry something you're not ready to put down yet. Go finish the car, she said. He left. The final week of restoration work was different from everything that had come before it. The earlier days had been about diagnosis and demolition and the hard technical labor of bringing something back from the edge. These last days were quieter, more precise, the kind of work that required a steady hand and complete focus and the particular patience of knowing you were close. Ethan worked on the chrome details, on the final adjustments to the engine timing, on the interior trim that needed to be exactly right, because it was the part people would touch and feel when they sat inside. He worked long hours, but they felt different than the long hours at the beginning, less desperate, more deliberate. Lily came every day that week. School had let out for a break, and rather than arrange childcare, Ethan just brought her along. She sat in her corner with a new book. She'd moved on from the previous one, had gone through 2 more in the interim, and was now into something that appeared to involve dragons, which she had described to Ethan as realistic fiction, a characterization he had decided not to challenge. She looked up from her book on Wednesday afternoon and watched him polish the passenger side chrome trim with a precision that had become almost meditative. It looks different, she said. Good different or bad different? Good, really good. She closed her book on her finger. It looks like a real car now instead of a project. It was always a real car. You know what I mean. He did know what she meant. There was a difference between a thing in progress and a thing completed, and the Mustang was crossing that line hour by hour, day by day. It had stopped looking like a restoration and started looking like itself. Dad, Lily said. Yeah. Is something going on besides the car? He looked over at her. She was 8. She was also, in some ways that mattered, considerably older than 8, in the way that children who have navigated complicated lives often are. Some things, he said. Good things or bad things? He thought about it. Complicated things. Some of both. She looked at him with the particular seriousness she deployed when she was deciding whether to press a point. Is it about what happened to you before? The thing you don't talk about? He set down the cloth he was using. What do you know about that? I know you used to be an engineer, she said. I know something happened and then you weren't anymore. I know you don't talk about it. She paused. Miss Patterson at school. Her husband had a thing happen at his job, and she says sometimes things get fixed and sometimes they don't, and the important part is how you are in the meantime. Ethan looked at his daughter. Miss Patterson sounds smart, he said. She has good advice, Lily confirmed, and went back to her book. He picked up the cloth and went back to the chrome and thought about how, for 8 years, this small person had been the reason he got up in the morning when the other reasons weren't working. She had not asked to be that. She had not known she was. She had just been herself, serious and curious and fully present. And that had been more times than he could count, exactly enough. Lily, he said. Some of the complicated things might get better soon. I don't want to promise because I'm not sure, but there's a chance. She looked up. How good a chance? Better than I thought a month ago. She considered this with appropriate gravity. Okay, she said. Okay? I believe you. She turned a page. Also, the car looks really good. He laughed. It came out short and rough, the way laughs do when they're unplanned, when something just catches you sideways. Thank you, Lily. You're welcome, she said, with the complete sincerity of someone who meant it entirely. On day 5 of that final week, Dana called. She didn't call about the car. She called because she'd been coordinating between Victoria's legal team and the investigation team, and something had happened that she needed Ethan to know about. There's been an anonymous report filed, Dana said, with the Virginia State Board of Professional Engineers, alleging past misconduct by an Ethan Cross, previously of Virginia Tech's graduate engineering program. Ethan sat down on the rolling stool. When? He said. The filing timestamp is 2 days ago. The board sent a notification to a business address they found on file, your shop. It may already be in your mail. He looked at the mailbox through the bay door. He hadn't checked it in 3 days. What does it say? The substance of the complaint is a rehash of the original academic misconduct allegations. Plagiarism, data falsification. It references the 2004 review board finding of inconclusive, and argues that the state licensing board should take independent action to formally bar you from professional engineering practice. Ethan sat very still. Victoria knows, Dana said. She asked me to call you before she did, to give you a minute. He stopped. That's Blackwell. Victoria believes so, yes. The filing is anonymous, but the language is very precise, very legal. Not something a person files from anger or personal grievance. It's drafted. He found out she's looking at him. That's what she thinks. It's a warning shot, or an attempt to destabilize. If you're suddenly dealing with a licensing complaint, you're distracted, you're defensive, you're less available to cooperate with her investigation. Ethan stood up. He walked to the bay door and looked at the mailbox. He didn't go to it. Tell me this doesn't affect the car, he said. It doesn't affect the car, Dana said immediately. You're not being asked to perform licensed engineering work. You're a mechanic who took a restoration job. The complaint is against your professional credentials, not your current business. Tell me it doesn't affect her case. The opposite, Dana said, and her voice shifted. Victoria says it's actually helpful. It's evidence that Blackwell is monitoring her movements closely enough to have identified you as a threat. It's evidence that he still has the mechanism, the anonymous complaint process, active and available. Her legal team believes they can use it. Victoria called 10 minutes later. He'd gone back inside and was standing in front of the Mustang, looking at it. I'm sorry, she said. Don't apologize. You didn't file it. No, but my investigation moved the right things, he said. If he's scared enough to do this, it means what you're building is working, right? A pause. Yes, that's right. Then it's fine. He looked at the car. How close is your team? Close. 3 days, maybe 4, to compile everything into a format we can present to the institutional investors. She paused. The gala is in 9 days. The car will be ready. Ethan? Her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before, not uncertainty exactly, but something adjacent to it. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Okay. How are you actually doing with all of this? He thought about deflecting. He thought about giving her the same answer he gave to most people about most things, that he was managing, that it was fine, that he was handling it. The answer he'd been giving for 15 years. Instead, he said, I spent a long time believing that what happened to me was just bad luck, that the world is random, and sometimes it takes things from you and there's no meaning in it, and the best you can do is build something else. He looked at the Mustang, finding out it wasn't luck, finding out it was deliberate, that a specific person made a specific choice and it cost me a specific future. He stopped. I don't know if that's better or worse than bad luck. I'm still figuring that out. She was quiet on the line. What I do know, he said, is that I need it to matter, all of it, not just the investigation, not just Blackwell getting what's coming to him. He paused, finding the word. I need the record to say what actually happened. I need it documented, somewhere official and permanent, that I didn't do what they said I did, not for my career. I don't know if I have a career in engineering anymore, but for... He stopped again. For Lily, Victoria said softly. He breathed in through his nose. Yeah, I will make that happen, she said. And she said it the way she'd said she would get Blackwell out of her company, not as a promise decorated with feeling, but as a simple statement of what was going to occur, matter of fact and complete. Whatever else happens, I will make sure that record exists. After she hung up, he stood in the garage for a while. The Mustang sat in front of him, blue and whole, and finished in all the ways that counted. And outside, the Virginia afternoon was doing its usual thing with the light. And somewhere in town, Lily was waiting for him to pick her up from her friend's house. And somewhere in a hotel room, a woman was building a case that was going to change both their lives. He picked up the polishing cloth. He had 3 more days of finish work to do, and he was going to do them right. And then the car was going to a gala, and it was going to arrive running and true. He started with the hood, because the hood was what people saw first. He got the anonymous board notification out of the mailbox that evening. He read it standing in the parking lot in the last light of the day. 2 pages, dense legal language, impeccably formatted, exactly as Dana had described. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket and drove to pick up Lily. She was waiting on her friend's front porch when he pulled up, backpack on, book in hand. She climbed into the truck and immediately said, "Can we get food? Emma's mom only had soup." "What's wrong with soup?" "Nothing is wrong with soup," Lily said, with tremendous patience. "I just want something else also." He took her to the diner on Main Street, and they sat in a booth by the window, and she ordered a grilled cheese, and he ordered the same because the menu had not changed in 4 years, and the grilled cheese was reliably good. The diner was warm and loud in a comfortable way, other people's conversations around them creating a kind of ambient noise that made the booth feel enclosed and private. 6 more days, Lily said, eating. "What?" "Until the gala. You said 9 days on the phone. I heard you. That was 3 days ago, so 6 more days." He looked at his daughter across the table. "You hear everything," he said. "I hear most things," she said. "I don't always say what I hear. That's different. That's very perceptive." "I know." She ate her grilled cheese. "Is the car going to be ready?" "Yes." "And then what?" "And then the lady whose car it is gets to see it, and we'll see what happens after that." Lily looked at him with the expression she used when she thought he was being deliberately vague. "You could just say what you actually think is going to happen." "I don't know exactly what's going to happen." "Yes, you do. You have a guess." He looked out the window at the dark street, at the yellow light from the diner reflecting on the pavement. "I think some things are going to change," he said. "Some things that haven't been right for a long time might start being right. I don't know exactly how, but that's what I think." Lily considered this. Is it going to be scary first? He thought about Damian Blackwell and the anonymous complaint and 12 days until an acquisition vote that would determine what happened to a billion-dollar company and the life of everyone connected to it. "A little," he said. She nodded once. "Okay," she said. "I can do a little scary." He looked at her across the diner tables. 8 years old, grilled cheese in hand, completely prepared to absorb a little scary because her father had said it would probably be followed by something better. He didn't deserve her, he thought. Not in the self-flagellating way people meant when they said that. Not in the worthlessness direction. He just meant that she was better than the situation she'd been handed. Better than a garage apartment in a forgotten town, and a father who came home smelling like grease and couldn't always explain why some days were harder than others. She was better than that, and she'd made the best of it anyway. He was going to try to be better than that, too. "Finish your food," he said. "I'm already almost done," she said, which was true. They drove home through the quiet streets of Caldwell, and the truck was warm, and Lily fell asleep in the passenger seat before they were even off Main Street, her head against the window, her book in her lap. Ethan drove slowly. 6 days until the gala. 3 days of finish work. An anonymous complaint in his pocket and an investigation building somewhere in the offices of Ashford Industries, and a Brittany blue Mustang sitting in his garage that had already survived more than anyone had thought it could. He drove the long way home, just to give her a few more minutes of sleep. 3 days before the gala, Ethan finished the car. Not just finished, completed. The last thing he did was sit in the driver's seat for 10 minutes with the engine off, going through every detail with the methodical attention he'd developed over 15 years of fixing things other people had given up on. He checked the gauges, ran his hand along the dashboard, tested every switch, every knob, opened and closed the glove box, pulled the seatbelt and let it retract. He was not looking for problems at this point. He was looking for anything he'd missed, anything that would reveal itself only in the quiet of a finished thing being examined with fresh eyes. He found nothing wrong. He got out, walked around the car 3 times, once fast, once slow, once crouched near the ground to look at the lower panels in the light, and then he stood back and looked at the whole thing. The Brittany blue had settled into itself over the days since Carl Beaumont had applied it, and it looked even better now than it had in the Richmond shop. There was something about the color in his garage, under his overhead lights, that made it look almost alive. A depth to it that caught the light differently depending on where you stood. The chrome was clean and catching, the tires sat right, the glass was clear. The interior was correct and solid and smelled the way a restored vintage car should smell, leather and light machine oil, and something older underneath, something that was just the smell of the machine itself, irreducible. He took 6 photographs with his phone, documenting it. Then he called Victoria. "It's done," he said. A pause on her end. "Done, done?" "Done, done. I'm looking at it right now. I'll come tomorrow morning. I need to—" She stopped. "I want to see it before the gala. Not at the gala. I want to see it here first, where it's been." "I'll be here." She was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet he could hear her in the background. The soft sounds of an office, papers, a door, the general ambient noise of a woman who ran a billion-dollar company from wherever she happened to be standing. "How are things on your end?" he asked. "Moving," she said. The word had weight to it. "We're presenting to the institutional investors the day after tomorrow, the morning of the gala. That's a significant day to do it. It's intentional. If they pull support before the gala is also a company event, a memorial. There'll be board members present, media, people who matter. The timing sends a message. It makes it visible." She paused. "Blackwell will be there. He was invited months ago before any of this started. I left the invitation standing." Ethan took a moment with that. "You want him in the room when it happens." "I want him to understand that there's nowhere to step back to, that it's over, and he knows it's over, and everyone who needs to see that can see it." She said this without drama, without the satisfaction some people would have put into it, just the statement of a decision already made and settled. "I'm not doing it for theater. I'm doing it because he has spent 20 years operating in spaces where the consequences of his choices were invisible to the people around him. I want the consequences visible." He understood that. He didn't say so, but he understood it completely. "Get some sleep," he said. "Probably not," she said, which was honest. "But thank you for finishing the car." That was always going to happen. After he hung up, he stood in the garage for a while with the lights on and the Mustang in front of him. And he thought about 43 days ago when he'd watched a flatbed back into this same lot and unload a rusted, silent gray machine that the last 5 people to look at it had called impossible. He thought about the first time he'd lifted the hood and put his hands inside the engine and felt the specific architecture of it, the thing he'd recognized without knowing he was recognizing it. He thought about his hands in that engine in March 2003 in a shop in Charlottesville doing work he'd been proud of. He turned off the lights and locked up and drove home. That night, he couldn't sleep either. He lay in the dark in his apartment above the garage and stared at the ceiling and thought about things in the non-linear way you think about things at 2 a.m, when your body is tired and your mind has decided to conduct its own business without you. He thought about his advisor at Virginia Tech, a quiet man named Dr. Parson, who had left the program in 2002 and moved to Canada, and whose departure had left Ethan without institutional protection at exactly the wrong moment. He wondered sometimes if Parson had known something was coming. He'd never asked. He'd lost contact years ago. He thought about the review board hearing, a conference room with a long table and 4 faces looking at him with the particular expression of people who have already decided and are performing the appearance of deliberation. He'd been 27. He'd been certain that the truth was self-evident, and that self-evident truth was enough. He'd learned, in that room, that it was not. He thought about the 2 years after that, the grinding, humiliating experience of watching a career he'd worked his entire adult life to build dissolve, piece by piece, while the review ground on and the offer from the manufacturer expired and the people who might have advocated for him went quiet one by one. Not because they believed he'd done anything wrong, but because association with a contested situation was its own kind of cost, and most people, when it comes down to it, are unwilling to pay it. He thought about how he'd ended up in Caldwell. A man named Roy Hutchins, who'd owned the garage and needed help with a backlog of work, and didn't care about Ethan's history as long as he could fix things, which he could. Roy had died 3 years later and left the garage to Ethan in a will that Ethan had not been expecting and which had changed everything, given him something that was his, an anchor, a thing he'd built into something better than it had been. He thought about Lily's mother, who had left when Lily was 14 months old. Not because she was a bad person, she wasn't, but because the life Ethan could offer at that point was not the life she'd agreed to when she'd agreed to it, and she'd been honest about that, which he'd respected even while it was the worst thing that had happened to him in a year full of difficult things. He thought about the years since then, the ordinary texture of them, the school pickups and the packed lunches, and the reading out loud at bedtime, and the specific ongoing project of trying to be a good father, while simultaneously being a man who was still, somewhere inside, figuring out what he was supposed to be doing with his life. He thought about the Mustang. He thought about Victoria standing in the garage the morning after the engine started, her hand flat against the car door, not crying, working very hard not to cry. He thought about the letter and what was in it. He thought about a man dying with unfinished business and making the only move left available to him, sealing his confession in an envelope and hiding it in the one thing he'd never managed to do right. He fell asleep somewhere around 3 and woke up at 5:30 when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Then he did. Mr. Cross. A voice he didn't recognize. Male, middle-aged, the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. My name isn't important. What is important is that you understand your current situation clearly. Ethan sat up. Who is this? A representative of interests that have been following your recent activities with some concern. I want to offer you some perspective. The woman you're working for is in a complicated legal and financial position. She's making claims that are difficult to substantiate and potentially defamatory. People who find themselves too closely associated with failed legal strategies often suffer collateral consequences. Ethan was very awake now. I'm not going to ask what interests you represent, he said, but I'm going to tell you this call is noted. Mr. Cross, I'm also going to tell you that if you or whoever you're working for has any additional filings or actions planned against my professional credentials, you should know that I'm in contact with legal counsel and that every action taken against me from here forward is going to be documented and added to an existing file. He hadn't spoken to legal counsel yet. He did now, formally in his own head, make a note to do exactly that. Is there anything else? A pause. The voice on the other end had the quality of someone recalibrating. You're making a mistake, the voice said. Possibly, Ethan said. I've made them before. Good night. He hung up. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark for a moment, then picked up his phone and texted Victoria. Someone just called me. Unknown number. Told me to reconsider my current situation. Thought you should know. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. It was 4 minutes after 6 in the morning. Tell me exactly what was said, Victoria said. Her voice was alert and completely awake. He suspected she hadn't slept at all. He told her, word for word as best he could remember it. She listened without interrupting. Okay, she said when he finished. This is actually good. People keep saying things like that about things that feel bad, because it means we're close enough that he's getting nervous. He filed the anonymous board complaint to distract you. When that didn't work, he escalated to a direct contact. She paused. He's accelerating. That's a sign that what we have is landing, or a sign that he has more resources than we do and is willing to use them. Both things can be true. He could hear her moving around, footsteps on a hard floor. I'm adding this call to the file today. Do you have your phone's call log? Yes. Screenshot it and send it to Dana, the timestamp and the duration. Another pause. How are you doing? I'm fine. Ethan. I was better before the phone call, he said. But I'm fine. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was related to one. We're 2 days out. Just hold on 2 more days. The car's ready, he said. I know. I'll see it this morning. She hung up, and he sat in the early morning dark of his apartment and thought about Damian Blackwell, a man he had never met, who had made a phone call 15 years ago that had sent Ethan's life in an entirely different direction, and who was now making phone calls again for the same basic reason, because Ethan Cross was in the way of something he wanted. He got up, made coffee, and went down to the garage to check on the car. Victoria arrived at 8, as she'd said. She had Dana with her this time, which was unusual. Dana had come to the garage a handful of times, but usually communicated remotely. The presence of Dana meant they were treating this visit as part of the operational sequence of the next 2 days, not a personal moment. Ethan had the garage doors open and the Mustang was visible from the lot. Victoria stopped when she saw it. She'd seen it in progress. She'd seen it in the Richmond shop after the paint. She hadn't seen it like this. Finished, in his garage. In the morning light coming through the open bay doors, every detail complete. She stood outside for a moment. Dana stopped behind her and did the professional thing, which was to look at her phone. Then Victoria walked in. She circled the car slowly. Ethan stood near the workbench and didn't say anything. This was not a moment that needed narration. She ran her fingers along the roofline, along the door seam, crouched and looked at the wheel, stood and looked at the chrome. She opened the driver's door and looked at the interior, didn't get in, just looked. Then she stood at the front of the car and looked at the hood. "Start it," she said. He got in. The engine caught first turn, exactly as it had every day for the past week, deep and even and completely certain of itself. He let it idle for a moment, then turned it off, and in the silence afterward the garage felt the way it always did after the engine had been running, like the absence of the sound was its own kind of presence. "It's perfect," Victoria said. "It's very good," he said, getting out. "Not perfect. There are 2 small things I'd have done differently if I had more time, but it's as close as I can get it." She looked at him. "What 2 things?" "The rear interior panel on the driver's side has a color match that's 95%. If I had another week, I'd redo it. And the engine timing is set to factory spec, but the original configuration this car had before the modifications would have had it tuned slightly hotter. I didn't have documentation of the original tune." He paused. "Nobody would know either of those things except me." "But you asked." She nodded slowly. "I appreciate you telling me." "The car is excellent," he said. "Whatever I'd have done differently doesn't change that." She walked around to the passenger side and stood there, looking across the roof at him. "My father drove this car," she said, "before it stopped running. He would have been maybe 30, 31. He had it for a few years before things got complicated." She put her hand on the roof. "He talked about driving it through the mountains in winter. Said it handled terribly in cold weather, and he didn't care. He said it was the most alive he'd felt behind a wheel." She looked down, then back up. "I never drove with him in it. I never got to do that." Ethan said nothing. "I'm going to drive it to the gala," she said. "Not be driven. I want to drive it myself." "It's your car." "Have you driven it during the restoration?" "Down the road and back twice. You need to know a car handles before you hand it to someone." "How does it drive?" "It's a 1967 muscle car with a high-performance engine and no power steering." He said this plainly. "It's not a modern car. It wants your full attention. The steering is heavy, especially at low speeds. The brakes are good, but they're not anti-lock. If you're not used to driving something like this, I've driven old cars before. My father made sure of that. Then you'll be fine. Just give yourself room and don't expect it to respond the way a modern car does. It's not a computer. Everything about it is physical." She looked at the car with what might have been anticipation. "Good," she said. Dana looked up from her phone. "Victoria, 2 hours." Victoria straightened. "Right." She looked at Ethan. "I have to go. The investor presentation is being finalized this morning. Today and tomorrow are going to be, She paused, looking for the word. "Significant?" he said. "Consequential," she said. "Day after tomorrow, we present to the institutional investors before the gala. I've sent you the documentation package through the legal team. You should have received an email from a woman named Claire Marsh. She'll walk you through your portion. It's not testimony yet, but she needs your confirmation on several factual points." "I saw the email. I'll respond today." "Good." She moved toward the door, then stopped. She turned back and looked at the car one more time. "Thank you," she said. And then, after a pause, "I mean that. Not just for the car, for all of it." He nodded once. "Go do what you need to do. She left. Dana followed, already back on her phone. The SUV pulled out of the lot and was gone, and Ethan stood in his garage with the Mustang and the morning and the 2 days still to get through. The day before the gala started quietly and turned bad by noon. Ethan had spent the morning doing the ordinary work of his shop, the sedan with the rewired bumper, a truck that needed a timing belt, the mundane jobs that had been waiting patiently through 43 days of restoration work. He was under the sedan's hood when his phone rang. The number was Claire Marsh from Victoria's legal team. "Mr. Cross," her voice was tight. "There's been a development. I need to brief you." He straightened up. "What happened?" "Someone entered the storage facility where the Mustang was logged between your shop and the gala venue. It happened last night. We had the car transferred to a secure holding facility in Fairfax County yesterday evening, ahead of tomorrow's transport. The facility had a security breach between midnight and 2 a.m. A pause. "The car was tampered with." He set the wrench down. "How bad?" "We don't know fully yet. The facility manager called us at 10 this morning. They found the driver's side window broken, the hood open. There are components missing from the engine bay." "Which components?" "That's what we need you to determine. We need you in Fairfax as soon as possible." He was in his truck and moving in 4 minutes. He called Victoria on the way. She picked up immediately. "I know," she said. "I just got off with Claire." "Who has access to that facility?" "It's a legitimate storage company. They have security." "Whatever happened, someone planned it. They knew the car was there, knew the layout, knew how to avoid the cameras based on what the manager described." Her voice was controlled, but there was something very compressed underneath it, like a fist. "This is Blackwell." "We don't know that." "I know it." She paused. "Can you fix whatever they did?" He was on the highway now, doing 75. "I need to see it first. But in general, I can fix most things if I have the parts and the time. The gala is tomorrow night. If critical components are missing, sourcing them in 24 hours is not straightforward. Tell me what you need when you see it. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes." "Victoria." He said it the way you say someone's name when you want them to stop for a second. "If this is what you think it is, if Blackwell did this, does it change anything about tomorrow? About the investor presentation?" A long pause. "No," she said. "If anything, it's another item for the file. We add it to the pattern. Intimidation, interference, sabotage. That's what this is. He's trying to take tomorrow away from us. He's trying to make sure the car isn't there, that the memorial is diminished, that I'm distracted and reactive instead of prepared." She paused. "He's going to be wrong about all of it." He arrived at the Fairfax facility 40 minutes later. The manager, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who had the defeated look of someone whose very bad morning had now extended into afternoon, met him at the entrance and walked him to the unit where the Mustang was stored. The driver's window was broken, safety glass pebbles on the seat and the floor. The hood was up. Someone had worked quickly and with specific knowledge. They hadn't vandalized randomly. They'd targeted particular components. Ethan stood over the engine and cataloged the damage. The carburetor was gone. The air cleaner assembly was gone. 2 of the valve cover bolts had been removed and the covers were loose, which could have allowed contamination if the car had been run. It hadn't been run, but the intent was clear. The primary fuel line had been cut, not pulled, cut cleanly with something sharp. He stood up and pulled out his phone and started making calls. The carburetor was the problem. He'd sourced the rebuild kit weeks ago, but the specific unit he'd installed was matched and tuned to this engine over 3 days of work. Getting another unit and properly tuning it in less than 24 hours was the kind of problem that had no clean solution, only varying degrees of difficult ones. He called 3 suppliers. 2 said no. The third, a man named Pete, who ran a parts operation out of a warehouse in Northern Virginia and who Ethan had done business with twice before, said maybe. "I have a unit that might work," Pete said. "It's not an exact match, but it's close. 1966 Holly, rebuilt clean. You'd have to tune it on the car. Can you get it to me today? It's 4 hours away by courier." "Send it." He called Victoria. "I can have it running by tomorrow morning. It's going to require overnight work. I need somewhere to do it, Somewhere I can bring the car and work through the night without being interrupted. My company has a facility in Fairfax. Commercial garage space, fully equipped. I'll have it open for you. I'll need Lily somewhere safe overnight. She can't be here for this. I'll arrange it. Dana knows people. He hung up and looked at the engine again. He thought about the 16 days he'd spent the first time rebuilding this machine. He thought about the carburetor work specifically, the hours of careful adjustment, the test runs, the tuning process that was part mechanical knowledge and part accumulated feel for this particular engine. He thought about Marcus Webb, the specialist from Chicago, standing over this engine and calling it a lost cause. He thought about the phone call at 6 in the morning. He put his phone in his pocket and started working. The Ashford facility was a large climate-controlled garage space the company used for vehicle storage and maintenance, and it was, as Victoria had promised, fully equipped. 2 hydraulic lifts, a full tool wall, diagnostic equipment, good lighting. Someone had left the overhead lights on and a coffee maker running on the workbench. He brought the Mustang in on a flatbed at 7 in the evening. Lily had been collected by Dana and taken to stay with Dana's sister, who had 2 kids and a house in McLean, and had apparently been informed only that a friend's daughter needed a place for the night. Lily had texted him at 6:15. Dana's sister has a dog named Pretzel. I think I'm going to be okay. He texted back, good. Go to sleep at a reasonable time. I'll try she'd sent, which meant she wouldn't. He started on the carburetor at 7:30. Pete's unit had arrived at 5, and he'd spent 2 hours going over it, confirming it was what Pete had said it was, a 1966 Holly in clean condition, properly rebuilt. It wasn't the unit he'd installed. It wasn't matched to this engine. Every engine had its own personality, built up over miles and modifications and years, and the relationship between carburetor and engine was one that required calibration. What worked on paper didn't always work in practice, and what worked in practice required testing and adjustment. He didn't have time for the kind of testing and adjustment he'd have liked. What he had was the knowledge, specific, lived, cellular, of this engine. He'd spent 43 days inside it. He knew its compression, its airflow characteristics, its idle behavior, the way it responded to changes in fuel mixture. He knew it the way a musician knows an instrument they've played for years, not just technically, but intuitively, in the hands. He installed the carburetor and connected the fuel line. He replaced the fuel line with a section he'd brought from his shop. He always carried spare line because it was the kind of thing that became necessary at inconvenient times. He cleaned the valve covers and reseated them properly with new bolts. He checked everything. Then he started the engine. It ran rough. The fuel mixture was off. Too rich, which was predictable. He made his first adjustment. Started it again. Still rough, but different rough. He made another adjustment. Started it again. He did this 14 times over the next 3 hours. On the 14th start, the engine settled into something close to right. Not the smooth, perfectly tuned idle he'd had before, but a strong, even idle with good response and no hesitation. He revved it twice, listening. Let it idle for 10 minutes, monitoring. He turned it off. Made one more small adjustment from instinct rather than measurement. Turned it back on. There it was. Not perfect. He said that word to himself deliberately, the same way he'd said it to Victoria that morning. Not perfect. Perfect was the thing he'd had yesterday, the result of days of careful tuning to a matched unit. This was the best approximation he could build in 6 hours, and it was very good. It would run. It would run tonight and tomorrow and through the gala, and anybody who wasn't him would hear the engine and hear a fully restored 1967 Mustang running exactly as it should. He turned it off again and sat in the driver's seat for a moment in the quiet of the garage. It was past 1 in the morning. The gala was in 18 hours. Somewhere in a hotel or an office, Victoria was preparing for an investor presentation that was going to determine whether Damian Blackwell walked into the gala tomorrow evening with his acquisition on track or with it in pieces around him. Ethan's phone had been quiet since 9. No calls, no texts from unknown numbers. He thought about the review board hearing, the 4 faces and the long table. He thought about the way he'd walked out of that building knowing his career was over, and standing on the sidewalk in the February cold, not sure where to go or what to do next, having never in his life not known what to do next. He thought about Caldwell and Roy Hutchins and the garage that had become his. He thought about tomorrow. He got out of the car, went to the workbench, poured the last of the coffee from the carafe into a paper cup. It was cold. He drank it anyway. His phone buzzed. Victoria. How is it? He looked at the car across the garage, the blue under the overhead lights, the chrome catching. He typed back, "It'll run. I'll have it to the venue by noon, 3 dots, then, thank you, get some sleep." He looked around the garage. There was a cot in the back corner, the kind of thing industrial spaces accumulated over time, left by someone for occasions exactly like this one. He looked at it for a while, then went and lay down on it without bothering to take off his jacket. He was asleep in minutes. He slept without dreaming, or if he dreamed, he didn't remember it. And when he woke up at 5:30, the overhead lights were still on, and the Mustang was still blue and still there. And outside, the Virginia morning was just beginning to happen in the thin strip of light visible under the garage door. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow had become today. He got up, washed his face in the utility sink, and went back to the car to go over it one more time. He had until noon. He was going to use every minute of it. At 7, he called Dana to check on Lily. Dana reported that Lily had stayed up until 10:30 talking to the dog, had eaten 2 bowls of cereal for breakfast, and had asked whether Ethan was okay, approximately 4 times. "Tell her I'm good," he said. "She'll want more than that." "Tell her the car is good. She'll understand." At 9, Victoria called. Her voice was different from last night, sharper, kinetic. The voice of someone already in motion. "The investors are meeting at 10, she said. "My team is ready. The file is complete. Everything we have on Blackwell, including your timeline, the service records, the financial connections to Hargrove, and the pattern of interference." She paused. "I also have the letter, my father's letter. My legal team has reviewed it, and they believe it's admissible as a statement of first-hand knowledge." "How do you feel?" he asked. A pause. "Prepared," she said. "I feel prepared." Then after a moment, "And angry. I've been angry for a while, but I think today it's useful." "Good," he said. "Use it." "How's the car?" "I'm going over it now. It'll be there." "Ethan." A pause. "Whatever happens today, with the investors, with Blackwell, with all of it, I need you to know that the outcome of the investigation and the outcome of this car are not connected. You did the job. You did it completely. Whatever else happens, that's done, and it's right, and nobody can undo it." He looked at the Mustang across the garage, the blue, the chrome, the car that had been silent for 40 years and was now awake. "Get in that room and do what you do," he said. She almost said something then. "I'll see you tonight." She hung up. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to the engine and spent the next 3 hours going over every detail of the work he'd done in the dark, in the early hours of the morning, alone in a garage in Fairfax County with a compromised car and a clock running down. He found 2 small things to improve. He improved them. At 12 o'clock, he loaded the Mustang onto the transport trailer and headed for the gala venue, and the Virginia afternoon was clear, and 18 hours of darkness and coffee and engine grease were behind him. And ahead of him was a room full of people and a man who had spent 20 years believing he would never have to answer for anything. Ethan drove. The gala venue was a converted industrial building in downtown Richmond that someone had spent a significant amount of money transforming into something that felt simultaneously historic and current. Exposed brick, high ceilings, warm lighting that made everything look better than it probably deserved. The kind of space that told you the event inside it was supposed to matter. Ethan arrived at noon with the Mustang on the trailer and spent 40 minutes working with the venue's logistics team to position the car in the entrance atrium, where it would be visible to every guest who walked through the main doors. He hadn't been asked to do the positioning himself. There were people hired for exactly that. But he watched every inch of the unloading and directed the placement with the quiet authority of someone who has earned the right to be specific about where a thing goes and how it gets there. When the car was down and positioned and the trailer was gone, he stood back and looked at it in the atrium light. The venue's track lighting hit the Brittany blue from above and slightly to the left, and the result was exactly the kind of thing that made people stop walking. The color was alive in that light. The chrome gave it back in bright points. The whole car sat low and purposeful on the stone floor, surrounded by the spare elegance of the space, and it looked exactly like what it was. A beautiful machine that had survived things it had no business surviving, rebuilt by someone who refused to call it impossible. One of the venue staff, a young woman with a clipboard and an earpiece, stopped beside him and looked at the car. "Whose is it?" she asked. "Victoria Ashford's," he said. "It's incredible." "Yes," he said. "It is." He left the venue and drove to Dana's sister's house in McLean to collect Lily. She came out of the front door at a run, backpack bouncing, and the dog, Pretzel, a low-slung beagle with the look of an animal that had concluded life was fundamentally good, tried to follow her out and was intercepted at the threshold by Dana's sister. Lily got in the truck and looked at him. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning to you, too." "It's 1 in the afternoon." "Good afternoon." She looked at him more closely. "Did you sleep?" "Some." "How much is some?" "Enough." She made the face she made when she didn't believe him but had decided not to press it. "Is the car okay?" "The car is fine. The car is at the venue." "Can I come tonight, to the gala?" He'd thought about this. The gala was a formal event, ticketed, catered, the kind of thing where an 8-year-old in whatever Lily considered dress clothes would be an anomaly. He'd been given 2 guest passes by Victoria through Dana, which he'd assumed were for his own attendance, which he hadn't entirely decided about. "It's a fancy event," he said. "I have the blue dress," she said, "from Cousin Rachel's wedding. That was 2 years ago. It still fits. Mostly." He looked at her. She looked back at him with complete seriousness, and also the particular expression of an 8-year-old who understood that she was making an argument and was waiting to see if it landed. "Okay," he said. She pumped her fist once, briefly, and then resumed looking out the window as though she hadn't done it. Booked. They went home to Caldwell to clean up, and Ethan showered and put on the only suit he owned, a dark charcoal thing he'd bought for a funeral 3 years ago and had worn twice since. It fit well enough. He found a white shirt that was actually white rather than the gray adjacent white that shirts became after too many washes, and a tie that he'd owned since graduate school and which he decided, after holding it up for 30 seconds, was still acceptable. Lily came downstairs in the blue dress, which did indeed still fit, mostly, and had brushed her hair out of the braid she usually wore it in so it fell straight and dark past her shoulders. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You look nice," she said. "So do you," he said. "I know," she said, and went to get her shoes. He stood in the kitchen of his apartment above the garage in Caldwell, Virginia, in a charcoal suit that smelled faintly of dry cleaning, and he thought about the last time he'd worn it. A funeral for a man who hadn't been particularly old, a man from town who'd had a heart attack in the parking lot of the hardware store and been gone before the ambulance arrived. He thought about how, standing at that graveside, he'd been aware with particular clarity of the smallness of his life at that point. The shop, the town, the quiet years, Lily growing up in the back room of a garage. He wasn't sure the life was small anymore. He wasn't sure it had ever been, actually. He was just now seeing it from a different angle. "Dad?" Lily called from the other room. "Yeah." "Do I need a coat?" "Bring one," he said. "Virginia evenings." "Virginia evenings," she repeated in a tone that suggested she was filing this away as a piece of wisdom, which made him feel briefly absurd. They drove to Richmond. The investor presentation had been at 10 in the morning in a conference room in the Ashford Industries building 12 blocks from the gala venue. Ethan hadn't been there. He'd been in a garage in Fairfax working on a carburetor, but Victoria had sent him a text at 11:47 that said simply, "It held. Both groups are pulling support from the acquisition." He'd read it standing next to the Mustang while the venue staff figured out the lighting angles, and he'd read it twice and then put the phone in his pocket and stood very still for a moment with his hand on the car's roof. It held. 2 institutional investor groups presented with documentation of Blackwell's pattern, the financial ties to Hargrove, the manufactured academic complaint. The interference with a student's career for the sake of a patent dispute, the subsequent decades of the same behavior in different contexts, in different industries, with different targets, had concluded that continued association with Damian Blackwell's acquisition strategy represented an unacceptable compliance risk. One group had sent a formal withdrawal notice within the hour. The second had called Victoria directly. Without their combined stake, Blackwell was short of the threshold he needed. The vote, scheduled in 4 days, was effectively over before it happened. Ethan had thought about this while he stood in the atrium with his hand on the Mustang's roof. He'd thought about what it meant, not in the abstract, not in the version where justice arrived cleanly and completely like a door opening. He knew enough about the world to know it wasn't going to be that simple. Blackwell had money and lawyers and the kind of institutional resilience that men with both of those things tended to have. He wasn't going to disappear. The acquisition was over. Blackwell himself was not. But something had broken. Something that had been intact for 20 years. The invisibility of his choices, the immunity of his methods, had cracked open in a conference room at 11 in the morning, and it wasn't going to close back up again. That was real. That mattered. It wasn't everything, but it was something substantial, and substantial was what they had. Well, the gala began at 7. Ethan and Lily arrived at 6:50, which was earlier than most guests and later than the staff, and the Mustang was in its position in the atrium with a small spotlight now aimed at it from above that made the blue look like something underwater, deep and clear and moving even when still. Lily stopped walking when she saw it. She'd seen the car before, of course. She'd spent portions of 43 days in the same garage with it. But she'd seen it as a project, as a thing in progress, as the subject of her father's relentless focused attention. She hadn't seen it like this, finished and lit and positioned in a room built to hold important things. "Oh," she said. "Yeah," he said. She walked around it slowly, hands clasped behind her back in a posture she'd developed sometime in the last year that made her look like a small person visiting a museum. She looked at the grille, at the chrome, at the interior through the glass. She stood at the back and looked at the fastback roofline. "It looks like the pictures," she said, "the ones from when it was new. That's the idea." She turned around and looked at him. "You really did it. We have 23 more days to confirm that." "Dad?" "What?" "Just say yes." He looked at the car. "Yes," he said. "We really did it." She nodded once, satisfied, and went back to looking. Guests began arriving at 7. They came in through the main entrance and stopped, almost universally, when they saw the Mustang. Some for just a moment, a brief visual interruption before they continued to the main hall, but others for longer. Ethan watched from near the wall as people circled the car, crouched to look at the engine through the gaps, took photographs. A man in his 60s stood in front of the car for almost 5 minutes without moving, and Ethan could see on his face the particular expression that vintage machines produced in people who had grown up with them. The time travel quality of it, the way an object from the past could make you feel briefly adjacent to who you used to be. Victoria arrived at 7:20. She came through a side entrance with Dana and 2 other people Ethan didn't recognize, lawyers probably, from the look of them, the particular alertness of people who had spent the day preparing for something consequential. She was wearing black, a dress that was simple and well cut and exactly right for the room, and her hair was down, which was different from every other time Ethan had seen her. She saw the car before she saw him. She stopped at the edge of the atrium and looked at it from 15 feet away, and something happened to her face that Ethan had not seen in 6 weeks of working for her, through all the visits and phone calls and a letter and a night in a hotel room going over the contents of her father's confession. Something let go. Not collapsed. She was not a collapsing person, but released. Like a breath held too long, finally exhaled. She walked toward the car. He moved to meet her, and they stood beside the Mustang together in the atrium while guests moved around them, and she put her hand on the roof the way she always did, flat-palmed, like she was taking the temperature of something. "You got it here," she said. "I said I would." "There were about 12 hours last night when I wasn't sure." "There were about 4 hours when I wasn't sure either," he said. "I didn't tell you that at the time." She looked at him. "What changed your mind?" "Nothing changed my mind. I just kept working until it was done. She was quiet for a moment. That's usually how it goes, isn't it? Usually. She looked back at the car. I heard from the State Board of Professional Engineers today, she said. My legal team contacted them with the documentation of the original complaint's origins, the financial tie to Hargrove, the manufactured nature of the review process. They've agreed to an expedited review of your case. She paused. Claire Marsh thinks they'll have a formal finding within 60 days, a finding of wrongful process and insufficient evidence. It'll be on the record. Ethan stood with that for a moment. On the record. The thing he'd told Victoria he needed in that phone call weeks ago. Not for his career, not for anything practical, but for the permanent version of things. For the account that existed after the people involved were gone. For what a daughter might someday be able to look up and find. 60 days, he said. Maybe less. Claire can be persuasive. Thank you, he said. And then, because it wasn't enough. That's, Victoria, that matters more than you know. She looked at him steadily. I know exactly how much it matters, she said. That's why I made it the first call I made after the investor meeting. Across the atrium, a small girl in a blue dress was examining the Mustang's passenger side chrome with the focused attention of someone conducting an inspection. Victoria noticed. Lily came. She has the dress. Victoria watched Lily for a moment, and something moved across her expression. Something warm and slightly complicated, the way things that touch a real place in you are never fully one thing. She's like you, Victoria said. Everyone says that. Is it true? He looked at his daughter. In some ways, she's also completely her own person and always has been. I'm not sure I take credit for any of the best parts. That's either very modest or very accurate. Probably both. Lily looked up and noticed Victoria and gave a small wave of the kind usually reserved for people you know well enough to wave at without making a production of it. Victoria lifted her hand in return. Lily went back to the chrome. There's something I need to do before dinner, Victoria said. She looked at the car, at the driver's side door. Will you help me get in? These heels are not designed for negotiating a vintage door sill. He opened the driver's door. It swung smooth and even, the hinges he'd rebuilt moving without protest. And she got in, and he closed the door, and she sat behind the wheel of her father's car for the first time. He stood outside the glass and watched her. She put both hands on the wheel. She looked through the windshield at the far wall of the atrium, and then she looked down at her hands on the wheel, and then she closed her eyes. She stayed like that for almost a minute. He didn't move. The guests flowed around him, the room filled with sound, conversation and music from the main hall, and the pleasant ambient noise of a formal event coming to life. None of it reached inside the car. When she opened her eyes, they were bright, and she blinked once, and then she was composed again, in the way she was always composed. But underneath it, something was different, looser, more settled, like a thing that had been braced for a long time had finally been allowed to rest. She opened the door, and he helped her out, and she stood beside him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. He would have liked it, she said finally. The car? All of it. She smoothed her dress. He would have liked knowing someone fixed it right. He would have liked knowing the person who fixed it right was the same person he'd hired in 2003 without knowing his name. She paused. He would have liked you. Ethan looked at the car. I would have liked to have met him. He wasn't easy, she said. He was difficult and driven, and he made choices I still don't fully agree with. But he was trying to make it right at the end. She looked at the letter's shape in her memory, visible in her expression even now. That has to count for something. It counts, Ethan said. Damien Blackwell arrived at 7:40. Ethan recognized him from photographs Victoria's legal team had shared in the documentation package. A tall man in his mid-60s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had probably been described as distinguished at some point, and had since settled into something that was the same thing but older and more certain of itself. He moved through the atrium with the practiced ease of someone who expected rooms to accommodate him. He saw the car first, the way everyone did. He stopped. He looked at it. Something moved through his expression, something that was not admiration, not exactly. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of seeing a thing you'd planned to stay dormant suddenly very much awake. Then he looked up and saw Victoria. She was standing 12 feet away, near the edge of the atrium, watching him. She had a glass of water in her hand that she hadn't drunk from. She looked entirely calm, the way the air is calm before specific kinds of weather. Blackwell composed himself in about 3 seconds, which was fast. He walked toward her with his hand extended and a smile that had been calibrated over decades. "Victoria," he said, "stunning venue. And that car," he glanced back at the Mustang. "Your father's project, you actually got it done." "I did," she said. She shook his hand briefly. "I had help." "Remarkable." He looked around the room, the easy survey of a man taking stock. "Quite the tribute. Your father would be—" "Damien." She said his name the way you put a period at the end of a sentence. "The acquisition vote has been canceled. I think you're aware." His smile didn't disappear. But it changed quality, became something that was held rather than felt. "I heard there were some investor concerns. These things happen. We'll regroup and—" "There won't be a regroup," she said. "Not on this. What I presented to the investor groups this morning is also being filed with the SEC's Market Conduct Division and with the Virginia Attorney General's office. Not the acquisition strategy, the pattern behind it, the interference, the manufactured complaints, the use of financial leverage to eliminate inconvenient obstacles." She held his gaze. "Including what was done to an engineering student in 2004. Blackwell's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough. "That's a serious allegation," he said. Quieter now. The room-working voice was gone. "It's a documented one," she said. "My father's letter is part of the filing. His handwritten account of what he learned and when he learned it." She paused. "He wrote about regretting his silence. I decided not to repeat that particular mistake." Ethan was across the atrium, near the car, not close enough to hear the conversation, but close enough to see it. He watched Blackwell's face from that distance, watched the particular thing that happens to a person when the ground they've been standing on for 20 years is revealed to be less solid than they believed. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing about these moments in real life. They weren't dramatic. Blackwell didn't lose his composure completely. He didn't make a scene. He was too experienced for that, too controlled. What happened was subtler and more irreversible, a visible internal recalculation. The recognition that the game he'd been playing had changed its rules in ways he hadn't anticipated and couldn't immediately counter. He said something to Victoria. She responded. He said something else. She said something brief and final sounding, and then she turned toward the main hall, and the conversation was over. Blackwell stood alone for a moment in the atrium with the Mustang. Then he left. He left the gala entirely, within 10 minutes of arriving, without going into the main hall, without speaking to the board members and investors he'd presumably come to see. Ethan watched him go. He thought about saying something to himself, some internal summation of what it meant to watch the man who had dismantled his career walk out of a room for the first time without being in control of his exit. He thought about how that should feel. What it actually felt like was quieter than he'd expected. Not empty. Not that. But not the flood of feeling he might have anticipated either. More like the specific sensation of a weight you've been carrying for so long you'd stopped noticing it, suddenly less present. Not gone. These things didn't go completely. But lighter. Manageable in a different way. He looked at the Mustang. "Dad." Lily appeared at his elbow. She was holding a small plate of something from the appetizer table, which she had apparently located without assistance. "Hey." That man left fast. He had somewhere to be. She looked at him with the expression that meant she knew there was more to it than that and was deciding whether this was the moment to say so. She decided it wasn't. She ate whatever was on the plate. "Victoria said I could sit in the car," Lily said. "When did you talk to Victoria?" "When you were watching the man leave." She finished the plate. "She said I could sit in the passenger seat. She said the driver's seat was hers." He looked at his daughter. "Did you already go ask her if you could?" "I was just talking to her," Lily said, with the complete innocence of someone who absolutely had gone to ask. He shook his head once. "Go ahead," he said. She went. She opened the passenger door. Carefully, because she knew how, and climbed in and sat with her hands in her lap, looking through the windshield, and she had an expression on her face that he wished he could photograph and keep. The expression of a small person sitting inside something that mattered, knowing it mattered, not entirely sure why, but certain enough to be still for it. The memorial program was 45 minutes. There were speeches, people who had known Victoria's father, who had worked with him, who had opinions about his legacy. Victoria spoke for 12 minutes without notes, and she spoke about him the way you speak about people who were complicated and real, not as a monument, but as a man who had built things and broken things, and at the end tried to account for both. She mentioned the car without over-explaining it. She said it had been sitting in a garage for 40 years, and that finishing it had seemed important, and that the right person had come along to do it. She didn't point Ethan out. He was grateful for that. After the program, as the room moved from formal to social, music returning, conversation loosening, Victoria found him near the bar where he was drinking something that was not quite whiskey and not quite anything else. "That went well?" he said. "Better than I expected," she said. Several board members came to me afterward. People who have been neutral on the acquisition question. They were different tonight. Warmer. She accepted a glass of water from a passing server. Word moves fast in these rooms. Blackwell's exit moved fast? Faster than he walked. She almost smiled at that. It'll be in the business press by morning, probably. Blackwell withdraws from Ashford acquisition. I don't control what comes after that, but I don't need to. The filings are in. The documentation is real. Whatever happens next happens in daylight. Is that enough? He asked. For you? She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. It's what's possible, she said. I've learned the difference. She looked at her water glass. My father spent years knowing something was wrong and not finding the moment to fix it. I think he kept waiting for the moment when it would be possible to fix it completely, all at once, without cost. That moment didn't come. She looked up. What I could do was act on what I had now and accept that the outcome would be partial and imperfect and real, instead of waiting for a version that was going to be all three of those things anyway, but also too late. He looked at her. You sound like you've been thinking about that for a while. Since I read the letter, she said. Since I understood what it cost him to wait. A pause. What does it cost you to wait, for things to be right, for the record to say what it should say, for the life to look the way it was supposed to look? She was quiet for a moment. I think it costs you the time. That's the currency. You wait for perfect and you spend the years. He thought about Caldwell, about Roy Hutchins and the garage and Lily growing up in the back room and the suit he'd bought for a funeral and worn to a gala. I don't think my life was wasted, he said. The years I spent in that town, I used to think of them as the wrong life, the one I ended up in instead of the one I was supposed to have. But Lily's there, and the work is real. And I got good at something different from what I trained for, and that turned out to matter. He paused. I don't know how to feel about the fact that it didn't have to happen that way. I'm still working on that. That's honest, she said. It's all I've got. She looked at the main hall, at the room full of people talking, and the light, and the sound of an evening that was doing what it was supposed to do. What happens next for you? She asked. After tonight. I go back to Caldwell, get Lily to school on Monday, finish the work I've been neglecting. He paused. Claire Marsh said the board review will be 60 days, so I wait for that, and I figure out what comes after. Does coming after look like something specific? He thought about it. There's a man in Roanoke who's been calling me for a year about a restoration project. A 65 Shelby he inherited and doesn't know what to do with. I kept telling him I didn't do restoration work. He paused. I might call him back. Victoria looked at him. Just one? I don't know yet. It depends on what 60 days looks like, and what kind of operation I can actually build in Caldwell versus what makes sense somewhere else. He stopped. I have a daughter to consider. She has a school and friends and a dog she's in love with that belongs to Dana's sister. I don't make decisions about where we are without thinking about what it costs her. That's a good way to be, Victoria said. And she said it without condescension, not as praise but as simple observation, the kind of thing you say when you recognize something real. She told me earlier this week she can do a little scary, he said. She's 8. She meant it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I know she meant it. I've met her. She looked at the entrance atrium, at the edge of the Mustang visible from where they stood. She sat in that car for about 20 minutes earlier. I watched her from across the room. She just sat there, very still, looking at things. Not restless, just present. She does that, he said. She can be still in a way most adults can't. She gets that from someone. He didn't say anything to that. They stood in the noise and light of the gala, and outside the night was moving toward 10 o'clock, and somewhere in the building Lily was probably talking to a caterer or examining the table settings with the same focused attention she gave to chrome details and library books and beagles named Pretzel. Victoria, he said. She looked at him. For what it's worth, he stopped, finding the words, not wanting to overcomplicate what he was trying to say. Coming here, that night in Caldwell when you showed up in the parking lot with the SUV and the assistant and the 43-day deadline and the impossible car. He paused. I almost said no. I know, she said. I could tell. What made you think I'd say yes? She considered. The bicycle, she said. He frowned. The bicycle with the training wheels, outside the garage. It told me something about who you were. A man with a daughter who brings her to work, who puts a bicycle outside the shop so she has somewhere to go, who said before anything else that she came with him, before we talked money, before we talked timeline. She paused. A man like that doesn't walk away from things that matter. He didn't seem like someone who would look at a 40-year-old car with a broken engine and decide it wasn't worth the effort. He stood with that for a while. That's a lot to read from a bicycle, he said. I've built a company by reading rooms, she said. You get good at it. He nodded slowly. And was I? Were you what? Worth the effort. She looked at him steadily, without performing the answer. You already know the answer to that, she said. He did. He just, in this particular moment, had needed to hear it said by someone other than himself. The gala wound down past 11. Guests left in slow waves, the room thinning gradually. The Mustang remained in the atrium as people walked past it on their way out, and most of them paused again even on the exit. Something about the car demanded a second look, and a third, like it was still making its case. Ethan found Lily sitting in a chair near the entrance with her shoes off. The blue heels she'd found at the back of the closet that were technically her size, but had apparently declared war on her feet sometime around 9 o'clock. She was reading a menu from the dinner service that she'd repurposed as reading material. Ready? He said. My feet hurt, she said. I told you to bring different shoes. I thought the dress needed these shoes. The dress did fine. Your feet disagreed. She put the shoes back on with the expression of someone making a significant sacrifice, stood up, and then looked at the Mustang one more time. What happens to it now? She asked. Victoria is going to drive it home tonight. And then, he paused. She mentioned something about displaying it at the company headquarters. Like in a building? Like in a building. Lily considered this. That seems right, she said. It shouldn't go back in a garage. He looked at his daughter. No, he agreed. It shouldn't. Victoria found them there, near the entrance, car key in hand. Dana was a few feet behind her, and the two lawyers and the assembled apparatus of a woman who ran a large company, even on evenings that were supposed to be personal. She looked at Lily. How are the feet? Compromised, Lily said. I know the feeling. She looked at Ethan. I'm going to drive it out. I'd like you to be there when I do, both of you. They stood outside the entrance as the atrium doors opened wide, and Victoria got into the Mustang. No help this time with the door sill, she'd figured out the geometry, and started the engine. The sound it made coming out through the atrium and into the open night air was different from the sound it made inside the garage. Outside it was bigger, more physical, a sound that moved through you rather than around you. Several departing guests turned back to look. A man near the valet stand actually put his hand on the arm of the person next to him to make sure they were paying attention. Victoria eased it forward slowly, through the open doors, down the gentle ramp of the entrance, and out into the Richmond night. She stopped at the edge of the lot and rolled the window down. She looked at Ethan. "Thank you," she said, over the idle of the engine, "for fixing what other people said couldn't be fixed." He looked at her in the driver's seat of a Brittany blue 1967 Mustang that had been silent for 40 years. "That's just the work," he said. She shook her head, just slightly. "No," she said, "it isn't." She rolled the window up and pulled out of the lot, and the sound of the engine receded down the street and then turned a corner and was gone, and the night settled back into its ordinary noise, traffic, wind, the distant sound of a city doing what cities do. Lily stood beside him on the sidewalk. "She's a good driver," Lily said. "She said she'd learned from her father. Did he teach her on that car?" "No," Ethan said. "He never got to." Lily was quiet for a moment, absorbing this with the specific gravity she gave to things that were sad without being simple. "But she got to drive it anyway," she said. "Yes," he said. "She got to drive it anyway." They stood there for a moment, the two of them on the sidewalk outside a Richmond venue on a warm Virginia night, Lily in her blue dress with her compromised feet, Ethan in his charcoal suit that smelled faintly of dry cleaning, and underneath that, inevitably, machine oil. The night was clear. The stars above the city were faint but present. "Dad?" Lily said. "Yeah." "I think good things are going to happen." He looked down at her. She was looking up at him with the expression of someone stating a fact, not offering comfort. Lily had never been in the business of offering comfort she didn't believe in. "What makes you say that?" he asked. "Because you fixed the car," she said, as if this were self-evident. "And you didn't have to, and you did it right. And when you do things right, good things happen. Not always right away, but they do." He stood with that. It was not a sophisticated philosophy. It was the philosophy of an 8-year-old who had spent 6 weeks watching her father work on an impossible machine and had drawn the obvious conclusion. It was also, he thought, not wrong, not complete. Life was more complicated than that, and he knew it in ways she didn't yet, but not wrong. Sometimes doing the work right was enough, not to guarantee anything, not to fix everything, but to establish, in a concrete and durable way, that you had been there and done the thing and done it honestly, that it had been real, that you had been real. The record of that didn't disappear. Even when people tried to bury it, even when the car sat in the dark for 40 years, the work that had been done to it remained in the metal, legible to anyone who looked closely enough. Real things left real marks. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." Lily took his hand. She still did this sometimes, not always, and he knew the window for it was narrowing, that she was 8 and would be 9 and then older, and one day she wouldn't reach for his hand without thinking about it first, and he was trying to be a person who knew to pay attention to the moments before that happened. They walked to the truck. He drove them home to Caldwell, through the Virginia night, on roads he'd driven so many times they were more memory than navigation. Lily fell asleep before they'd gone 10 miles, her head against the window, the blue dress making her look, for a moment, younger than 8, like the small, unformed version of the serious person she was becoming. 60 days from now, a board would review a file and issue a finding, and the record would say what it should have said 20 years ago. He didn't know yet what he'd do with that, whether it meant engineering licenses and career reconstruction, or whether it just meant the truth being in writing, permanent, available, to be found. He didn't know if he'd call the man in Roanoke about the Shelby. He didn't know what the shop would look like in a year, or what Caldwell would look like, or what he would. What he knew was that somewhere in Richmond, a Brittany blue 1967 Mustang was being driven through the night by a woman who had finally gotten what her father promised her, and the engine was running clean, and the sound of it carried. What he knew was that he had done the work. What he knew was that it had mattered. He drove home, and the road was quiet, and Lily slept against the window, and the night opened ahead of them like something that had not yet been written.